There you go.
Oh, is it still snowing?
Designed to keep you safe.
Good morning, folks. We are now live. Good morning, folks. We're now live. Good morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Joint Fiscal Committee. It's remarkable to see everybody underneath their masks. Thank you for being here. One of our members is joining us remotely, Senator Sears, and so we have him on the screen. I would just remind us of the rules of the joint committees are that you need to be in person to vote. And so when we get to action items, we will attend. We know that, but I just want to remind folks of that. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the July 30th minutes.
Acceptance of the minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Then the next item on the agenda is the administration's fiscal reports and updates. Commissioner Gresham, thank you very much for joining us. Please join us. Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for good morning, everyone. I'll just, with the chair's permission, just take it right from the top.
Yep.
So one of the documents that you see is the Transportation Fund and General Fund balance reserves. Every year around this time, we report to you the balance in those reserves as of year end, prior fiscal year end. So the Transportation Fund, the General Fund balance reserve as of June 30th, 2021, the end of the prior fiscal year, was a little over $80 million. That's up from about $31.5 million in FY20. And the committee, I think, will recall fondly that the surplus that we had and the statutory language that directs half of the unobligated and unappropriated surplus into the balance reserve. And so at the end of FY21, we sent, I believe, a little over $48 million to the balance reserve. So that brought it up from 31.5 to where it is now. Interestingly enough, I think I pointed out to this committee last time, it actually would have been a little bit more than that. We had, I think if were not for the stipulation that it can't be any more than 5% of the prior year's base appropriations, we would have sent even more to the balance reserve. So it's at its statutory cap, which would make it equal to the stabilization reserve. Which in my admittedly not too long career in this job, I've never seen. I mean, that's an unusual situation, and that's just a great story in that regard. The transportation balance reserve similarly finished the prior year.
Excuse me, Commissioner, we have a question.
No, it's not a question, but it's more for people who aren't dealing with the reserves as much, or people who might be listening. What we were talking about is also known as the rainy day reserve when we're talking about that 80 million, which is separate and apart from the stabilization reserve, which has to be the 5% of.
Right.
So I just wanted to make people clear that what we're referring to is what is normally or commonly called the rainy day reserve.
Thank you. And that pause reminds me that we may have members of the public listening, and I just want to let folks know that all of this material is published on the Joint Fiscal Office website under the Joint Fiscal Committee. If you follow the links, you will find it under the agenda for today. And these documents that are reflecting what we're discussing are posted there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reserve picture for the general fund is really a great story. I mean, in addition to the rainy day fund and the stabilization reserve, we also, you'll recall, have just under 100 million in the caseload reserve and a little over 20 million in the 2753 reserve, which will be paid out this year, and 150 million in the temporary reserve that we set up by this body and the governor to deal with pension reform. So in total, we have, what is it? That would be a little over $400 million in reserves, which is really quite extraordinary at this point. So the transportation balance reserve ended the year at $28.5 million, and that's up from a little over $24 million the year before. And in fact, $0 million the year before that. So it's been a steady increase, and that has to do, I think, largely to do with the fact that they kind of moved their appropriations to match what were initially thought to be revenue projections. It turned out to be a little bit more conservative than the actuals. But that's a good story. The other thing I would add to that is that in anticipation and in hope that the federal reauthorization, Federal Highway Act coming up shortly, to the extent that we receive more federal money to deal with various infrastructure projects, we would be able to use that money as a state match by 23. So I think that puts us in very good stead in FY23 to the extent that more federal money is coming. Are there questions on that?
Not seeing any.
So moving on to another reserve topic, the 2753 reserve, which I referred to briefly a minute ago. Committee will recall that in FY16, we were, I would say, struggling a bit to come up with the necessary money to meet a 27th payroll, which is an unusual event, as well as a 53rd week in Medicaid. In its wisdom, the legislature and the governor's office set up a 2753 reserve to anticipate the next time we would have a 27th payroll and a 53rd week of Medicaid payment. That is this year, FY22. So that fund, generally in the spring, probably during our Pay Act process, we will distribute that money to make good on the 27th payroll and the 53rd week of Medicaid. That too is just a great story. I mean, we started 7 years ago, and every year we made contributions, and over a 7-year period, it turns out that we more or less nailed it, with one exception, and that is that this year we were surprised, I suppose, by a large increase in Medicaid caseloads, largely due to the fact that we're not redetermining eligibility on a regular basis. And so Medicaid caseloads have gone up, and utilization has recovered really from its doldrums during the height of the COVID pandemic. So our Medicaid spending has been a bit higher than we anticipated. So for that reason, the 53rd week payment will be higher than we originally had forecast. So we will need roughly about $850,000, we think, in addition to what we've already set aside. I would note that in the kind of context of $12.5 to $13 million of need, that's pretty small. Had we not set aside money every year, that would have been the need. Similarly, in the payroll, we more or less nailed that. We're guessing $150,000 short. So you can anticipate me in asking for a budget adjustment to true up those two funds. But again, I would say that in the context of the total payments, which will be roughly $24, $25 million, I mean, I think that was really an unequivocal success story in terms of putting the money aside, anticipating when it would come. Similarly, we're going to continue that as we are required to do in next year. And so the next time we meet a 27th payroll or a 53rd Medicaid will be 2033. And so we have.
I'm not worried about that.
So a number of us are sighing with relief, maybe.
So could you refresh my memory? Obviously, are those payments recalibrated over that period of time?
They are.
Because as you're saying, we nailed it, but I just
They are.
confirm that throughout that 7-year period, we are each year taking a look in terms of the amount that needs to be in.
That's true. What we do this year is actually we set out a schedule for the next 11 years, I think it would be. But every year, yes, we look to see what our payroll growth has been, what our Medicaid caseload and utilization has been. And so it's true, we are recalibrating every year. This year, we're doing a pretty simple analysis. We're looking out at what our current FY22 payroll is. And I think we actually a real payroll run in September. As well, we're looking what our Medicaid caseloads are, and we're inflating those using a healthcare inflator as well as a long-term average growth in payroll inflator. We're inflating them out 11 years to see what our projected obligation will be. And we're just doing, the division, looking at an 11-year payment and what's 1/11 to that. And that will be our first year payment this year, which will be a little over $3 million. And to the chair's point, we will every year recalibrate that to the extent that it looks like we're lagging, maybe we'll contribute. Are there other questions on 2753?
Just while we're having that conversation, I'd note that the Agency of Transportation does not participate in this program. And it would be nice to bring them into the fold on that.
Duly noted. Oh, really? I mean, it's good.
Yeah. Thank you.
What I thought I would do is skip to the CRF and then finish up with budget instructions. So there's also a sheet that we sent to the committee on the status of coronavirus relief fund appropriations and spending. I would note that on the first page, you see that sitting on the bottom line, unallocated, is a little over $1 million. Pardon me. That was as of last week. We are keeping very close track of what is spent and what is not. We had in the bank, as of earlier this week, a little over $54 million of money that is unspent. The committee will recall all of that has been appropriated. Some of those appropriations have been fully spent. Others have not. And so the 54 million represents the balance that has not been spent. I would remind the committee that 15 million of that is going to corrections. That was appropriated in Act 74. So that brings it down to about $39 million of money that is still kind of unspent. Of that, there's roughly 16 to 17 million that is in Department of Public Service and build out, as well as the utility arrearages program. There's another 10 million or so dollars in human services. The largest body of that is in their provider stabilization fund, as well as about 3 million or so in the dental assistance and homelessness program. As well, there's 2.5 million or a little less than that with the legislature for outfitting the buildings for various requirements. As well, there's a little over $3 million of public safety. And that is really a precautionary amount in case anticipated FEMA claims turn out to be denied for whatever reason. We have money there. So, and then there's a smattering in a number of other appropriations, smaller amounts. But overall, we have a little under $40 million is yet to be spent. We do anticipate a substantial increase in the amount of money going out the door. In fact, we're starting to see. So that is the status of that fund. Are there questions? And there's a very, very detailed sheet that I sent to you that will show you where all the bodies are buried.
Thank you for that, and we appreciate the detail. Are there any areas where you have concern about, in fact, enabling that money to get out by the deadline? This money has to be spent by December, the end of December.
I don't know if I'd say concern. I mean, we're staying in touch with it as well. We have, I think, procedures to reallocate to the extent that we need to, either through payroll or other programs. So I think we're on top of that. I do think that there are a couple of question marks out there. You know, as I think the committee is aware, the rearrages program, we continue to contact as best we can consumers to let them know the power companies are actively involved. Social media is being so we're getting out there, but you know, to the extent consumers ultimately have to take the message, they have to take. Similarly, in the provider stabilization fund, we have money there really that's in case of need. You know, we will determine whether there is actual need there. And to the extent that there's not, take the money back. So, you know, those are probably the two biggest question marks. But, you know, I'd like to assure the committee we're being very sensitive to that. And we won't be caught, you know, short by the end of the year.
So at our November meeting, perhaps we can have a real
You'll have a much
analysis of where we are and, you know, what you're.
You'll have a much better feel.
Yeah, yeah. Great, thank you. So,
Mary,
yeah, oh,
the
beg
question
your
just
pardon.
came to mind. In the event that a booster shot is authorized this evening by the FDA, well, it's a iterative, it's a step process, and there would need to be, I think the CDC would then have to send it out. Are funds from these funds anticipated to be used to cover those costs statewide?
That is one potential use. I mean, there's a timing issue there. We'd have to make sure that the money is obligated by the end of the year. But yeah, that is one potential use for it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And actually, while we're on the topic of other monies that are available, can you tell us anything about the FEMA money that we now understand that FEMA money is available to us through December?
Yes.
Is there anything to say beyond that? Because that certainly is putting some additional resources into our coffers.
It has, and you know, the continuation of the 100% FEMA match has been, I think, very salutary to you know, saving and reallocating CRF. But I don't have any other specific endowment for you otherwise.
Okay, thank you. That's just been not widely reported, and it's a significant addition to our revenue situation. Okay, thank you. So not seeing any, oh, I beg your pardon, Senator Kitchell?
Yes, we had a communication, and we had put money in to address the situation of our adult day and the fiscal impact. And the indication was that there's been some delay or slowness in getting that money out. So I just using this opportunity, if you could follow up and see, obviously participation and the revenue streams have been greatly impacted in terms of census being about half of what it normally would be. And so I just thought, well, we're on the topic of where we'd appropriated money. Some of it, it's obviously there still to be moved out, and maybe there are other areas where appropriations are sort of in process. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention it.
Okay, I will follow up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is a request to change the title of an already approved limited service position. It's a pretty pro forma process, but we realized that in fact we need to approve it because of the way we had approved it in the past. So
yes, committee will recall that on June 22nd, during the fiscal committee meeting, I came to you with a colorful chart that I will wave in front of you.
Oh, yeah. I did remember.
That asked for a number of positions in different agencies to carry out the mission of our various ARPA programs. And perhaps I will acknowledge being the error of being a little bit too specific on that sheet. Maybe I've learned a lesson in that regard. And one of the positions that we listed on that sheet was for the Department of Economic Development. And we asked for a staff attorney too, to help with the economic recovery. It turns out, I think you folks will acknowledge we're in I would say, a difficult market to find people. The labor market is challenging. And when you do find the right person, which in this case we have, unfortunately, the position of this person is a staff attorney 4. So
I'm sorry, Adam, I couldn't hear you.
what we found, what we think is a very qualified individual to fill this role. That individual's current role is the equivalent of a staff attorney 4.
Okay.
And so that person would not be incented to take a staff attorney 2 position. But yet we are, very attracted to this person, and we would like to hire. However, the actual approval was for staff attorney 2. Again, apologies for kind of playing smaller ball than this committee typically does, but I wanted to bring it to your attention that we would need a change in that position to hire this person. Coming before you to ask for that. My colleague, Commissioner Goldstein, is available if you have more detailed questions.
Thank you. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
And I would
Sometimes-
just note for the committee on the screen, we have Commissioner Goldstein with us also, who's here to answer any questions. Thank you for joining us, Commissioner. Senator Kitchell.
Sometimes specificity does prove to put in limitations. So I would move to eliminate the staff attorney 2 limited service position that within the Department of Economic Development that was authorized on June 22nd, part of the larger ARPA funded position request package, and replace it with a position titled staff attorney 4.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Not seeing any. Let's see, is this a roll call? No, I think it's just a voice
I
vote.
think a voice.
Yes, yeah. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. And
Thank you.
Before we move on, actually, I'd like to back up for 1 second. I skipped over the budget instructions.
Oh, we
and I just wanted to make
did, yeah.
sure that you think I was.
Not even level funded.
So in
Smart.
the
it's an hour.
career in this position, I have yet to send out budget instructions that actually ask departments or allow departments anything more than a level fund to start out with. This year is different for a number of reasons that we lay out in the memo. But I did want to say that we've tried, and I know this committee is aware of this, we've tried to be very careful on our base appropriations. The past several years, we've had substantial amounts of one-time money, largely because revenue forecasts, revenue actuals have come in substantially above revenue forecasts. So in the budgets in the prior 2 years, we were basing our instructions on revenue forecasts that were really quite sobering. And so in addition, we were in the middle of COVID. So we asked departments to level fund. Many departments did that. There were special situations. I'm proud to say that we were not reducing or eliminating programs. I think we were able to operate government at the level that this committee and Vermonters expect. This year, we were looking at a challenging macroeconomic environment. And by that, I mean you're aware that the second year of the Pay Act, the first year of the Pay Act, which we are baking into our base appropriation, was roughly 4% increase. So departments are, starting with a 4% increase that they're factoring into their base. So that's, I think, one cost pressure that's there, and we know about it. And to ask departments to level fund would mean almost certainly asking them to make substantial changes in their operations. So we're aware of that. We also have, for 2 years, we froze internal service fund costs this year. I mean, I think there are a fair number of pressures. So internal service funds will probably increase in and around 2 to 3%. We've given them a 3% guideline. In addition, last year, you'll recall that because the retirement contribution was up in the air, it was being debated, we really weren't sure what it was going to end up being. You'll remember that we paid for the increase in retirement contribution with one-time testing, largely because we anticipated changes. Those changes didn't actually happen, but we know that there's a task force out there. So anyway, I think it's reasonable to take that little over $14 million that was the up last year and put it in our base, because we know that these payments are part of base spending. So there are a number of cost pressures there. And, I don't think these are unusual. I think we've, kind of budgeted unusually because we've been in an unusual period, but I think we have to face the fact that we have some cost pressures out there. And also the departments have been very lean for a number of years. So we went out and we told departments that they should use a target of no more than 3% increase in their budget submissions. Having said that, I'll say that too is going to require some kind of resource changes, almost certainly, because I think some of the pressures that departments face out there will very rapidly bite into that 3% increase. So, this is not an off to the races budget, but I think it reflects the reality that we see. Anyway, budgets are due at the end of this week. The end of next Friday.
Yeah.
A week from today, and we'll start budget meetings the following Monday or Tuesday. So for your reading pleasure, the budget instructions are out there, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have.
Not seen any. Thank you for not letting us inadvertently omit that. Appreciate it. While it's a pleasure to know that your instructions are for a 3% increase, I would note that basically means level funding, given all of the growth pressures within budgets. But at least it is not asking folks to reduce their budget. So we look forward to seeing how that comes out in the mix. So thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, I was excited. We were briefly ahead of schedule. We're now back on time. So Commissioner Brown and your colleagues, I don't know who all you would like to ask to join you. I will leave this to you, but please come on up and we can pull more chairs up. It's up to you how you would like to do this. So the next item on the agenda is the proposed use of a child care development grant and ARPA stabilization grant. We had in the budget instructions that we receive a plan of this nature, and that is what we are receiving. So thank you for that. Welcome. Delighted to see you. I think we may have some discussion about that. That some of us have had some questions about the process for developing this and the proposal. So let us turn it over to you and we'll see how we go.
Sure. And for the record, Sean Brown, Commissioner for the Department for Children. With me, I have Miranda Grant, the interim Deputy Commissioner for the Child Development Division, and then also Sarah Truckler, our Chief Financial Officer. And I'd also want to highlight the committee. We've had some changes in the Commissioner's office. Jeffrey Pippinger will be moving over from his role as Senior Advisor and Legislative Liaison to be the Director of Policy. Judy Rex is retiring at the end of October. Have hired Jeffrey's replacement as for the Legislative Liaison and Senior Advisor. Katerina Lazias is with us today, and she'll be she's new in that role. I'll be working with her closely through the sessions.
Yeah.
To bring her for introduction purposes as well today.
Terrific. Thank you for that.
Sure. And I will leave the bulk of the questions and the testimony today to Miranda and Sarah, but I do want to just kick off by thanking the committee for the opportunity to be here today, and also just recognize that I think the pandemic has laid bare the importance of childcare and supporting families, employers, and that they've really stepped up during the pandemic. And I think we all owe our childcare providers a debt of gratitude that they've stayed open throughout the pandemic to serve first responders and essential workers, and then quickly reopening and then serving the rest of Vermont's families as well. And I just wanted to recognize and thank them for their work. As you indicated, we have received several different sources of federal stimulus funds for the childcare system. You've asked us to kind of engage in a process and work with stakeholders, providers, the best way to allocate those resources to support the system. We engaged in that work and then submitted a report. And then I'll just turn it over to Miranda and Sarah to kind of talk about the process we went through and that led to the report that we submitted.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, for the record, my name is Miranda Grant, Interim Deputy Commissioner for the Child Development Division. I thought I would just start with how we got here today. So as pursuant to Act 74, the Department for Children and Families may obtain excess receipt authority for the child care stabilization grant funds if further appropriation is required. Act 45 required DCF to submit a plan on the proposed use of the child care development block grants and the child care stabilization grants in excess of funds appropriated in state years 2022. Today, we will review the plan that was submitted on September 1st. The department requests the Joint Fiscal Committee approve the plan proposed to report for the guards to the CCUD and stabilization funds and allow for the excess receipts and approve the plan and required federal obligation and liquidation dates. I'd like to start with the stakeholder input. This Child Development Division was committed to engaging with as many stakeholders as possible to develop the plan for the American Rescue Plan Act funds, as was requested in Act 45. The Child Development Division first met with stakeholders on the Building Bright Futures State Advisory Council. That meeting was on May 24th. The meeting was held with the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, Vermont, and Associations for Africans Living in Vermont on June 16th. On June 22nd, the Child Development Division met with our Child Care Advisory Team that was established during the pandemic response. July 7th, the CDD's Director of Programs met with the Director of Operations for Vermont Professionals of Color. On July 9th, the Child Development Division presented to child care providers and other programs on a webinar hosted by Building Bright Futures. On July 27th, the Child Development Division presented to out-of-school time providers on a webinar hosted by Vermont After School. And the last collaboration effort was a survey sent by the Child Development Division and all of our new and pre-established partners. From direct conversations with providers in the spring and early summer, we learned programs were struggling not only to hire, but even have a single response to job postings. When summer was ending and programs began hiring, I heard concerns from providers about how long background clearances were taking to be processed. In response, the Child Development Division reprioritized work. The Child Development Division's business technician unit that processes our background clearances was understaffed by almost 50% for experiencing our own staffing issues. To help, we brought in licensors, and our sister division, Economic Services, graciously found 2 employees to assist as well. This is our busiest season for background clearances, and we anticipate 2 more weeks of increased background clearance requests. As of Wednesday, CDD has started working on applications that are only 1 week old, an improvement from processing applications that were over 3 weeks old. Providers have asked us to look at group ratios to support their staffing shortages at the beginning of the day. In partnership with other entities, such as Division of Fire Safety, we are exploring what we may be able to do to ease staffing ratio pressure. The division shared these examples to show we are listening to the field and their needs, and input from the field also informs the plan that is outlined today. I'll begin with the ARPA discretionary funds. The division has 2 ARPA discretionary funding streams, matching funds and the just straight discretionary funds. The matching funds will be used to support the Child Development Division's transportation services to and from child care programs, while DCF continues to evaluate data on the transportation of all children in Vermont by DCF. These funds must be obligated by September 30th of 2021. DCF has worked diligently to procure a DCF transportation contract over the course of state fiscal year 21, which would provide transportation for children utilizing services within the Child Development Division and Family Services Division. Over the summer of 2021, DCF determined a pilot would be the best path forward to understand the statewide transportation data and needs. The matching funds will pay for this pilot and support the Child Development Division's transportation needs as we move forward the state fiscal year. The ARPA discretionary funds totaling $18.3 million are targeted towards systems building. The following proposals are built around knowing that the funds are one-time and cannot be used on a system that will have ongoing expenses. The division will use rebate results-based accountability to monitor the effectiveness of the programs, paying particular attention to any new lessons learned from programs that already existed that are being enhanced to meet an increased need due to the pandemic. Brand new programs such as the student loan repayment and prospective student grants already have an evaluation component per Act 45. And if the programs are effective, it'll be an area the division targets for the funds being proposed out of the Biden administration. The Child Development Division proposed the following. $2.6 million for workforce support, state fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. $500,000 for special accommodation grants, state fiscal year 22 and 23. $500,000 in business training, state fiscal year 22 and 23. $1.8 million in childcare and after-school capacity building, state fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. And $2.5 million to start a program that would support intervention, social, emotional, mental health, and staff training needs. The program will be designed and developed in coordination with the Agency of Education, Department of Mental Health, and Vermont Department of Health, state fiscal year 24. The above proposed plan encompasses what the Child Development Division heard from stakeholders was needed to both meet immediate needs and future needs. And let me know if you need me to pause. I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but I'm happy to just keep going.
And committee members, I'm focusing this way, so please wave or somehow. Yeah.
So basically, you're citing what is in this report.
And then, yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. And just giving you, trying to answer some questions I believe the committee might have had as well with there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right, so we'll move to the ARPA stabilization funds. Those funds must be used to address the financial burdens faced by childcare providers during COVID-19 and the instability of the market as a whole. Grant has been granted $29.3 million. $14.7 million of these dollars have already been appropriated in the fiscal year 22 budget. The Child Development Division will disperse formulaic beneficiary payments through a non-competitive application process. The formula includes a base rate for programs with various rate increases listed below. I'm going to share with you those rate increases that is not in the report. I thought it was important to share. So a 10% increase for programs that offer or will offer infant and toddler care. A 10% increase for programs that offers or will offer alternative shifts. So evening, weekend. A 10% increase for programs that agree to direct at least some of their award to staff compensation. 25% increase for programs that agree to direct some of the award to reoccurring monthly retention bonuses. 10% increase for programs that agree to work towards pre-COVID accessibility for families in their program. A 10% increase for programs that operate a minimum of 5 days per week with a minimum of 8 hours of care offered each day. A 10% increase if a program operates in a low income area, and a 20% increase if a program has whose enrollment is racially or culturally diverse. Providers will, in theory, if they meet these, could have all these increases on their base.
Not 10% per item?
So the 10% if they
Overall.
provided infant and toddler care, and then they could get another say
Another 10% if they do.
for the base rate.
So those are 7, 8 options, so they could see an 80% increase in their base rate.
Seems like they're stacked, like a
can't-
shift.
95.
You do infant care and you have a shift and you got increased staff compensation.
Yes.
If you added them all, if you qualified under every one, they're additive.
Yes, exactly.
That's what you're.
Yeah, so as a result, you could potentially see upwards of an 80% increase in your base rate
For the stimulus funding.
for the stimulus fund.
Yes.
Once that's in place, it's hard to take away. Because infants are gonna be infants after COVID, and
Yeah.
shift differentials are gonna be a problem after COVID. And so, it,
Well, some of these categories, I think, were in the federal legislation as areas they wanted states to incentivize for providers.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
understand that, but, I'm just, the reality is, once they go out, because some of these needs are not necessary, have pre-existed COVID. And
Absolutely.
so,
We know that currently, and and we've had those conversations internally as well, that these are one-time funds and supplemental payments to providers. We're watching closely the work that's going on in Washington DC and several of the other packages that are on the table in terms of infrastructure and childcare is a major focus right now. And there is hopefully going to be more federal funding opportunities for the state in terms of an increased block grant of federal funds coming in. Obviously, there's still a long ways to go on that, but we know that that is a focus at the federal level right now, childcare, crucial to the economy and our recovery.
so is this adding all up? Is that how we spending the 14.7? I just want to be clear on that. What you're doing is giving us the breakdown of. Okay, all right, thanks.
And just to clarify, we're actually needing to spend all of the 29.3 million. We need to obligate those funds before you end this state fiscal year. And this is a supplemental payment, so these adjustments aren't being made on the CCFAP rate. It would work as if a provider got $100 supplemental rate, and that's the base rate. And then they get a 10% increase for providing infant and toddler care. They're getting now $110. So if it's another 10% increase, it's $120. So it's per child as a supplemental payment to stabilize providers consistent with the federal appropriation, and 90% of those funds have to go out the door to providers with the obligation dates.
Thank you. Representative Quinn.
Under the program design here, I don't see this being named explicitly, but my understanding is that often the challenge for providers is to sort of make the leap into this model in addition to the sustaining money for whatever the model is for infant child care, infant toddler care, or a different shift. And so I wonder how much, even though it's not structured this way exactly, you're using this one-time infusion to help providers get their head around the business model of moving into second shifts or infant toddler care. And I wonder if we talked about it that way, it might be easier for us to get our head around using one-time dollars for that. And I wonder how, sort of aligning that with your business supports, which I also have questions about.
So the CCFAP program now and some of the work that the Child Development Division already prioritizes funding for growing infant and toddler capacity. There's obviously a higher rates associated with infant care in the child care financial assistance program. And then when people work different shifts or have longer care needs, there's adjustments made in their certificates and their hours. So we already use both state and federal funds to prioritize some of these policy goals. But in addition, the federal government was clear that they wanted us to prioritize specific areas within childcare and provide additional or increased funding to some of those targeted mechanisms. So that's what you're seeing here. But we do some of that already through infant and toddler childcare capacity grants and the way that we structure our rates.
Thanks. I have a couple other questions. Please, let's do this now. The business training support for childcare, is that something you're going to bid out, or are you building capacity internally to be doing that with the 500,000?
We'll be bidding that out. Yeah, all of the discretionary,
Okay.
those are all things that will need to be put out for procurement.
Okay, thank you. And there'll be one package that's procured for that?
Not necessarily, because I don't know that we have one entity. So we will be specific about this is what we are looking for. And if there was one entity who could do multiple, that would be great. But if not, that is fine as well.
Thanks. My second question is the workforce supports for social, emotional, mental health, et cetera. That sounds to me so much like what the CIS program already is. And so feels to me like a little bit of a reinvention of the wheel. And so I'm curious how it isn't.
I think, so I can use an example that both DMH and then the Agency of Education. So within our UPK programs, we use the early multi-tiered systems of support.
Mhm.
So that it is looking at what is that system, and it is really about building capacity within programs to be able to support children that have extra or special needs. So I think that is what our goal is, and that's specifically why we're trying to make sure that we're having conversations as well with the health department. Just is there room for us to build? I think is something that the state has talked about for a while, but we're looking at, is there a piece of this that one-time funds can help support? Does that help?
Thank you.
See other questions at this point? There will be.
Thank you. Yes, of course.
I'm having a hard time reading it. 2.5 to support intervention, social, emotional, mental health, and staff training needs. So staff training needs are separate and apart from intervention, social, emotional, and mental health supports. Are those for the children? Or are we talking about the staff?
It is both, to be honest. We know that we have children that have needs, but then it is, we need to be able to support the providers that are providing support to kids that have extra needs.
Okay, so it's to have the staff more skilled in how to intervene, how to handle behaviors, how to recognize mental health needs, et cetera. So I assumed that to be the case, but it was, I wasn't sure whether we were talking about direct services to individual children, or whether we're talking about the development of competency on the part of
Thank you. Yeah, I think we keep going.
Thank you. Once approved, the Child Development Division will hold a webinar to inform eligible providers about the program design and application process. Our established and new partners have offered to assist us in reaching out to providers as they did when we sent out the stakeholder survey. Child Development Division was allocated 4 limited service positions to help support the dissemination of ARPA funds. One of the position's major job duties is to assist programs with completing applications and answering any questions that programs have. It's also important to note that the federal guidance is very clear that the stabilization grant should be as user-friendly as possible, and the state has worked closely with all parties to ensure that the information that is needed to report to the federal government is collected while keeping the application clear. It is anticipated that applications will be open in October, with initial payments made in November. While this is 2 months away, the Child Development Division continues to disperse over $1 million in coronavirus response and Supplemental Appropriation Act funds, which have many of the same allowable uses. Since April, we've infused just over $7.5 million into the system. I'm going to talk about the administrative costs of both of these funds. The Child Development Division reserved 10% of the Child Care Stabilization Funds to administer the program. Presently, GCF is anticipating using these funds in administration and is able to allocate more funding to the child care programs should the administration fall short of the 10%. Pursuant to the report, the Child Development Division proposes using $500,000 of the CCDBG funds for internal administration. Additionally, subrecipient grantees, so those that would be getting the discretionary grants, will be allowed administrative costs in accordance with the federal requirements. Now I'll move. There was a couple of areas that the department or the division was asked to look at, and one was the child care workforce support. So as we've already talked about, the stabilization program design built an incentive for providers who certify that they will allocate some of their stabilization grant award to their workforce in the form of staff compensation and or monthly retention bonuses. According to the survey that was sent out, 79% of respondents said they would use their ARPA stabilization funds to support workforce within the allowable expenses. Some of the other additional considerations. The Child Development Division does not recommend using one-time funds for the expansion of this child care financial assistance program to families whose incomes are up to 400% of the current federal poverty level, as it creates budget pressures in future years. The federal government has increased the child independent care tax credit to help middle-class families afford child care. Consideration should be given to federal developments in this area before change is made. The ARPA stabilization grant program design provides an incentive for infant slots above the base rate to providers that qualify, which addresses the access to high quality infant care. The Child Development Division has proposed spending $1.8 million in ARPA discretionary funds annually to support child care and after school capacity needs and further investing in new slots and coverage for Vermont's children. Child Development Division does not recommend using one-time funds to ensure that co-payments for families participating in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program do not exceed 10% of the family's annual gross income, as it will create base budget pressures in the future. However, the ARPA stabilization program requires regulated providers to certify that to the extent possible, they will provide relief from co-payments and tuition payments for families enrolled in their program and prioritize relief for families struggling to make payments. The Child Development Division was also asked to make sure that families had access to high quality, affordable child care for culturally and racially diverse families, and that regulated, privately operated, center-based child care programs and family child care homes were stabilized. This effort has been enhanced with the priorities as outlined previously in the stabilization formula. Lastly, the division was also asked to look at the fiscal impact on Head Start program statewide. There are currently 7 Head Start grantees in Vermont, providing more than 1,400 at-risk children with a skill they need to be successful in school and life. In response to the COVID-19 public health crisis, Vermont Head Start programs received $1.2 million in CARES Act funding, $423,000 through their public law, thank you, and $1.7 million through ARPA. Additionally, the Child Development Division has provided $532,000 in coronavirus relief funds, and Head Start providers were eligible for CARSA, the program that we are currently running, and they will continue to be eligible for stabilization funding. In closing, the Department for Children and Families Child Development Division feels that we've presented this committee with a plan that is reflective of the current and future needs of the early childhood and out-of-school time workforce, but is also committed to continuing conversations to ensure that if specific needs evolve, we will have the ability to meet them. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I think we should have a good conversation about how to proceed with this. So do folks have questions? Yes. Thoughts? This is an action item. The reports were sent to our the chairs of the respective committees who have jurisdiction. I don't know that they've all had an opportunity to significantly weigh in. I know the thoughts that go through my mind is this. One, we have a huge problem that needs to be addressed, and thank you for wrapping your minds around it and offering us a proposal for how to do that. Those of us who sit upstairs in the Appropriations Committee worry deeply about using what is essentially one-time money for ongoing, my math falls apart, for ongoing needs. And maybe you can talk to us about how we're going to, what's going to happen in FY 25 when the ARPA funds are gone, and we've created a demand annually of what, almost $6 million in today's dollars.
I thought it'd be more like 14.7.
Well, I wasn't adding in some of the, we're creating a demand, a significant demand for ongoing dollars. I wasn't looking at the workforce supports necessarily, but just thinking of.
No, I was looking at this here that we're going into the
Okay.
rates and stuff.
A lot of money,
Sure.
the order of 14.
Points well taken. I would say anytime you receive new one-time money, it creates, in many ways that you spend it, it's going to create some expectations or base pressures in the outer years when those funds expire. And I think that's just the nature of how that process works. There's a couple things that are out there that I think that impact this conversation. The first being, there is a lot of conversations I mentioned earlier at the federal level about expanding federal funding in this area, and the state could benefit from that if that comes to fruition in the next year or so. I know that that's part of the packages being negotiated down in Washington, D.C. right now. But I think the other piece is, the H-171 and the child care study. Timing on that kind of dovetails with this, where it's looking at making some major changes and investments in the system. And I think that we want to see, the results of those studies and reports and see how they would impact, pressures that might have been created here with this federal stimulus money to the system as it expires. I think that would create an opportunity for a conversation as well at that time.
In an ideal world, we would have had that analysis before we were making financial commitments, but we don't live in an ideal world.
And irony is if we don't make these commitments of these funds,
Don't get
turn them to
money.
the federal government.
Yeah,
So,
right.
Well, that's my question in here. The first place we have to make a decision with that is we have to have a commitment on the 14.7 by the end of the fiscal, by the end of this calendar year, correct?
So you've appropriated $14.7 million in the SFY 22 budget for the Child Care Stabilization Fund.
Yep.
Those funds have to be fully obligated this fiscal year, and we intend to obligate them out to providers using this beneficiary formulaic grant program. And because of the timing of that grant program, we can't obligate funds that we don't have approval to obligate, and we have to have those obligated by April, but we're notifying providers in October of what those total package of stabilization funds would look like. And it's a pretty significant administrative burden for the department to notify upwards of 1,000 providers, right? So the goal is to be able to clearly articulate to them, here's how much your formulaic grant is, and here's the period of time that you have to use these to stabilize your programs coming out of COVID and into this recovery period. But right now, we don't have the ability to fully obligate that award consistent with the federal requirements. That's kind of the first big date that we.
So that obligation. So in, I'm trying to get your timetable of these pieces. You need an approval sometime before the end of October then to meet the timetable that you have laid out. But really, you have to let them know by April.
We have to let them know in December if we don't anticipate fully being able to fully obligate the funds, and we have to notify them in April if we were if we couldn't I shouldn't say that. In December, we have to notify them if we weren't able to obligate 50% of the funds, and in April, we have to notify them if we don't anticipate being able to obligate all of the funds.
So that's the 14.7, and you have to have 50% of it. You have to let the feds know by December that you have a place to obligate them, and then you have till April to let the people on the ground know.
We have till April to report to the feds on the intent of the 100% obligation. But for providers, we want to tell them how much their total stabilization package is going to be so that they're able to use that for.
By April
No.
or
No.
by December.
Our intent is to notify them in October.
I'm not talking about your intent. I'm talking about what we have to do to stay out of trouble with the feds.
So it's December and April with the federal government.
December and April. So this plan, that first step to make sure we don't lose any of the money, by December 11th, we have to let them know that we have a plan to spend 50% of it. And then, okay.
And I would add that, our goal is based on our work with providers and what we're seeing in the system. It is stabilized. And so we want to make sure that we alert providers what they're going to receive in stabilization funds so they can start planning how to spend those. And our goal would be to get approval, get those out to them as quickly as possible so that we can start seeing the benefits of those dollars in the system.
I hear all of that. I would just say in the concern that this committee has got, you have a plan that's a September plan that's been out there. I don't think that the Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate has had a chance to really understand this. And I think the Senator from Washington, Senator Cummings, would know better than I, but I've heard no feedback from them. So in some respect, the idea of moving today on this seems a little fast to me.
My concern, Senator Westman, is that waiting and having a further conversation on this further delays it. And then if there's concern.
We're not worried about
that. Well, but I'm just, if I may, and then if the committee wants us to go back out and come up with or tweak the proposal, meet with providers. That's a further delay. And then we're starting to really bump up against federal deadlines. And I'll be frank with you, our division's ability to move that quickly, given the current environment that we've been working in, it would be challenging. And so I just want to be very frank with the committee that we really need approval today to move on this proposal.
Let me, I need to be clear. Are there parts that need to be moved ahead more than others? Because you sent, the way we wrote the legislation, it said that you would present the plan, you sent it out to the various parties, including the members of this committee, as well as the subject matter committee chairs, September 7th. In fact, the House committee submitted their comments back. I don't, at this point, I'm not aware that any were submitted by the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, although the report went out and the instructions were that that the plan shall be provided to the chairs of the House Committee on Human Services prior to action. So that's what you're doing here. I'm not sure whether the comments which have been sent to you, whether the concerns expressed by the House Human Services Committee related specifically to the stabilization payments that you've laid out, where you feel that there needs to be some certainty. Providers need to know what resources will be available to them so that they can actually start their planning and their work more immediately. And that's why, if I understand your testimony, October was a desirable date. So I'm just wondering whether there are certain pieces here that are more time sensitive and the extent to which the feedback from the Human Services Committee relate to, for example, these supplemental payments that from your perspective need to be moved more quickly or made certain more quickly. I'm just trying to sort out the various pieces of money, the various uses, and those that perhaps could be staged a little later.
I'm happy to at least start with the kind of money and what has to come first versus what could be. So the Child Care Stabilization Fund from the federal government has really limited purposes, right? 90% of those funds go out the door to childcare providers to stabilize.
Yeah.
We're administering that in a formulaic approach, which is consistent with other states and the work that we've done with our federal partners.
And okay, and all of that is relative to the October desired date.
Exactly. And our goal is to be able to tell providers in October, here's how much your formula is out of our total award. And here's the amount of time you have to spend that. And now you've got to do some planning on within the eligible expenditures on how you want to stabilize your system over this period of time. And our other New England states have already gotten these monies rolling. So we really want to be moving this on those. It also means that we're not doing 2 rounds of notifications to providers and we're giving them a clear picture. The CCDBG funds, the Child Care Development Block Grant Fund, so that's where you're seeing that $2.6 million for workforce supports, the special accommodation grants, the business training. That is the funding that has more time attached to it. And the decision to not move forward today on that would just simply mean that we're not increasing special accommodation grants into the field, which we know has significant in SFY 22. So we're within our existing base budget. We are not expanding infant and toddler capacity or after school capacity with that $1.8 million. We're sticking to our $1 million that we have in our base for that, of which 800,000 goes to infant and toddlers, 200,000 broader. So those things are kind of enhancing existing programs that we have, recognizing some of those really key needs of the system. But The delay to not move today simply means we're just not doing that as quickly in SFY 22. Whereas the stabilization funds, we really need to move those funds or risk not meeting the dates of the federal government.
Thank you. Before I recognize you, Rep. Fagan, can you tell us what obligation means? Or do we need to just have a plan, or do we actually need to have a commitment of the funds?
We need to allocate those funds
They
to
need to be allocated.
providers, yes.
Okay, thank you. Rep. Fagan?
Madam Chair, that's exactly the question I was going to ask, and I was actually going to be a little more specific by using an imaginary childcare provider organization, and I'm not going to use the name Schmidlap in it, but private little joke. So let's say you have XYZ childcare, and they're told in October that they're eligible to receive some of these funds. Prior to actually allocating those funds to them, do they need to come back to you and say, this is how we're going to, this is what I can obligate, this is what I can spend, so that you can then report to the feds by the 11th of December? The overall, addition of the entire amount?
So the great thing with stabilization funds is they've been determined as beneficiary payments to the childcare providers by the federal government, which means that the providers give us some key pieces of information that we then apply to the formula, which you saw some of those differentials around prioritizing certain components. And then they get the funds and they get to use them. So we are not asking them to submit a budget. We're not asking them to submit proof of expenditures, because they're beneficiary payments. So once they apply to the program, there's a template that they have to do for us to make sure that we do meet our requirements, and then they'll get these funds. And then our goal is to administer them similarly to how we are administering our current funds through monthly payments to providers, where they would just receive that similar to other benefit programs that would flow through DCF.
Thank you.
One of the questions that I have heard is around your public engagement process and the sufficiency of reaching out to kind of the non-traditional communities or folks who do not kind of know how to participate in our traditional sort of processes. Can you talk to us a bit more? My reaction when I read the report was, oh, they talked to, and all of the obvious suspects, but can you give us some more detail in terms of that engagement, not just with the heads of those organizations, but do you believe that you received sufficient feedback to really understand that you're reaching people who normally do not have an ability to participate in the process for making these decisions? My being, yeah.
Perfectly clear, yes, thank you. Yes, so I can say I came from the TANF program, and so I have longstanding relationships with Amila from USCRI and Mukobi from AALB. I think what took us a little bit longer is that the Child Development Division, we have a fair amount of new staff who didn't have relationships with the Vermont professionals of color. We had reached out to some other entities, but I think a lot of people are reaching out to them, and since they didn't all have time within the time frame that we did to connect, but that is a priority for us, is to, like you said, it wasn't just like, let's check the box. It is, we want to find a way to continue having these conversations. What table should we be joining to make sure that we are understanding how we can reach these individuals that typically don't feel like that they can access our programs. It is really important to us, and that is why we have that one limited service position whose job it will be to provide that outreach and to answer any questions, to really help people walk through what is needed. So that is our approach.
So that's subsequent work that you're talking about in the future. So the stakeholder activity that you have on page 2 of your report is not the end of it, is what you're telling us, is that these conversations and efforts to connect with the individuals and families is an ongoing commitment.
That is correct.
And what are, if we make a decision today what are our opportunities to subsequently influence program design? Do you see, if we're hearing from other people, the need to reach out in different ways, et cetera, what are the next steps where there might be some room to influence this?
And when you say influence, in what ways would you be looking to what areas?
I don't know.
Provide feedback or suggestions?
Well, just one, I'm hearing from some colleagues are concerned that they've had a sufficient opportunity to think about this, and I'm trying to understand what room there may be for them to.
I mean, we're always open
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
feedback and hearing from our partners, particularly our legislative partners. And so there would be an opportunity before we make the final, parameters of the program to weigh in, and we consider any suggestions and if possible, incorporate them into the overall program design or the application process or the disbursement process. And then also any ongoing processes that we may have in working with the providers. We're certainly open to that type of engagement and feedback. And so you could provide it through Miranda or myself, or happy to meet or, with legislators, that's their preference, or they can get phone call or email, whatever process works. Work through it.
Senator Kitchell, I want to go back to Senator Westman's comments. Obviously, we moved on this. We appropriated the 14.7. And if I understand what you're saying is that, in fact, the federal guidelines outline a lot of how that money can be used. So it's not as though with some of like ARPA or some of the other federal dollars where you have a great deal more freedom or flexibility. So you're saying that they're much more directive. They want you to address infant care. They want you to address very well-known and well-defined needs. And that's what you're doing with the stabilization supplemental grants.
Correct.
So in some ways, we've appropriated the money. We now know that there's prescriptive uses of that. You want to get some kind of certainty out to the provider community, because if it's destabilized, then 6 months from now, probably
Time is of the essence.
isn't gonna help. So I'm just trying to sort out where people have got the concerns, and it seems more that it's not around the stabilization grants, where the federal rules sort of are dominating. And the time frame is more sensitive. It's more around the block grant. So I will put it out here for now, and then maybe discussion that we move. And I don't know if we can split it up, but perhaps we could move to approve the program recommendations, which were not included in the report that we received. That's the one thing about, the 10% increase on infant care, the 10% for after-hour shifts, the increase in staff compensation. But those are all really reflective of the federal language.
And some of the priorities which are.
Okay. So this gets the money out to the provider network.
So there is
Just for
motion.
clarity, Senator Kitchell, is that the stabilization? Is that the stabilization funds? There's really 4 votes here that I was looking at potentially. So is that the stabilization
Yes,
funds of 29.3 million?
No, I was really looking at the 14.7 at this point, if I understand, which is really the amount that is so critical for the provider, stabilization, and what you want for October.
Yeah, so you've appropriated 14.7 out of that $29.3 million. And we are asking for approval to move forward with allocating the full 29.3 million based on the fact that we would be sending 90% out of the door in beneficiary payments. So we have the full scope of, say a provider is going to receive a grant of $10,000. Then they're able to know in November, over the period of these stabilization funds, you have $10,000. And I should say that's not the amount, but you get what I'm saying. We're looking to tell them exactly how much they're going to get, as well as meet the federal requirements around obligation.
So basically, that's a really important point. What you're proposing to do with these increases or these supplemental payments is to obligate all 29.3.
Correct.
Not the 14.7. So that was appropriated.
Correct, because we have to, the obligation periods are, we need to notify the federal government in April if we aren't going to be able to obligate those funds.
And the obligation is across 2 fiscal years. So we've appropriated the one for 22, but you're also talking about the funds that would be available in 23.
Correct. I believe actually the period of the stabilization funds is through September 30th of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. There's a
So
lot of,
going into,
yes. So we would just notify the providers of their beneficiary, and they would receive payments between now and that time period that they would be able to then use to stabilize their program.
so we've appropriated what we've appropriated in the current budget. You're asking for authority going forward. It strikes me that we can say whatever we say today, but there is also other decision points down the road when we're looking at the budget.
Except that we would be notifying providers of their beneficiary award, and therefore, if it's later in the budget, then a provider has been notified and obligated of that award using the total 29.3 million as the amount of money dispersed between the provider network. And the federal regulations are specific on the providers that are eligible for this, so we actually know the provider pool is going to be able to access these funds, which is why we're able to determine what that formulaic amount would be.
So we opted not to move forward and spend the 14.7. We feel it's more appropriate to utilize it as a package. And that's kind of how we're presenting it to you today, is that we want to.
And that avoided that notification.
Yes.
Okay.
And also it gives our providers certainty to know that this is what they're going to get throughout the duration of these funds, instead of us possibly having to come back to them in the spring saying, there was a decision made to go in a different direction. For whatever reason, that's the process we operate in it. And this gives them certainty that these are the uses of the money, and this is how much they can anticipate, and they can start utilizing it right away, knowing it will be consistently there throughout the period of time that we can spend these dollars.
So when we get the report back from page 171 on the design of the system going forward, what if they're proposing something entirely different than what we're doing today?
So to be clear, these funds have to be spent to stabilize providers.
In a
They're
very prescriptive way. We have a little latitude, but not in terms of their uses, but also the process and the application process is very prescribed from the federal government in the time frame. So they're really apples and oranges when you look at it that way.
Don't think about them together.
Yeah, I would not.
So
I think there's more connection with the block grant funding.
Yeah.
The increased block grant funding that we have several years to spend. I think there's probably more of a nexus there with what you're thinking about with 171, but not the stabilization dollars.
So again, very little choice in how we use the stabilization dollars. They are heavily prescribed by the feds.
That's very helpful,
Yeah.
I think, understanding the process. So,
You know, in our proposal here and spending some of the block grant funding in the ways that we proposed here in the amounts was based on our work and with our providers, listening. You know, the sessions we've done is that these were the areas identified as priorities. And, you know, frankly, they kind of mirror the priorities we did in many sessions in terms of capacity building, toddler, you know, and the different proposals we use are, you know, where resource limitations have really prevented us in the past from meeting that full, that need. And this allows us to, but obviously, you know, there is a longer time frame to spend those dollars and more time for conversation and review of the use for those funds.
I just realized we had a motion on the table. I'm not sure it was seconded, so maybe it's.
so my motion
Yeah.
would be to authorize the allocation of the 29.3 million as presented, recognizing that it's really over a multi-year period of time, but it creates the stabilization and the certainty that is so important, that this is really very prescriptive in terms of how the money is used. So what I will, my motion is then is to authorize the 29.3 in this grant as presented by the department.
Second.
Thank you. And to be clear, you withdrew the previous motion of, and now we're talking.
Yeah.
And we have a second on that. So thank you.
And this is
Yeah.
the ARPA childcare stabilization only. I'm not, I think we, just to be clear, we may want to have some discussion about the block grant and whether we move any of that out, but this is only regarding the federal ARPA childcare stabilization.
Mary,
Yeah.
thank you. So I also noted that you had asked authority for excess receipts. Is that still necessary? Because I haven't heard you mention excess receipts during your presentation.
So we likely won't need the spending authority based on the timing, but we want the approval of the plan so that we can engage in excess receipts process once we need the spending authority under this authorization instead of using a BAA mechanism, given the timing of BAA and when we would likely need to dip into that next set of $14.7 million.
Okay, thank you.
So does that mean that we should look at amending this, what was just put on the table, or does the program itself and authorizing it as the senator has proposed take care of that?
I believe we're fine because the legislation authorized the department to seek excess receipts in accordance with the approval of this.
That's fine.
For all federal
plan.
excess
That's
receipts.
fine.
Representative Brigland?
This is a motion I support. I just want to make sure I understand what we're authorizing. Do we need to authorize the full 29.3? Was the 14.7 already appropriated and you're off to the races? And so what we need to authorize is 14.7, or is it the full 29.3?
We're authorizing all of it. 14.7 is already appropriated, so we're releasing that and also authorizing the release of the full 20 of the remainder for a total of the 29.3. And the reason, again, is because that will allow a single notification to this defined group of providers that are eligible for stabilization. And so they will know in advance what their total resource or what their total award will be, even though it's for that, over that longer period of time.
So you have not received $29 million for this yet, have you?
We have the 14
You have the
in our budget, but I think
But
this was a
talking about
very
the
unique
drawdown.
process for us. And I think, having some of the money appropriated and to ask for a report, to release the rest of the money, but we really want to release it all in a packet as a package. And that's why we're here today, kind of laying it out that way. So we apologize if there's been lack of clarity on our part, what the request was and how we were moving forward. But that is our request. We wanted to make sure we shared with you the work with our providers. This is the package we want to present, even though you've allocated some of the money, we look at it as a package.
Have we received $29 million from the feds in ARPA money to do this?
I don't know the status if it's been received, but we have our notice in our allocation.
Okay.
We have our award.
Okay. So we're not authorizing spending money that we don't expect we will have.
No, this is.
Okay. Do folks know where we are and what we're doing? We're ready for, I think, are we ready for a vote? And this should be by roll call.
I would agree.
So let's call the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I have here as far as the motion is to authorize the Child Care Stabilization Program funding of $29.3 million as presented by DCF.
I would put ARPA in front of it very clearly to do.
Okay. ARPA funding. Thank you, Senator. Representative Ansel,
Yes.
Senator Bayland.
Yeah.
Representative Breakland.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears, because he is distant, is unable to vote. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
We are 9, I guess that would be 9-0-1.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you for helping us through that. I know that we have wildly blown our agenda here, but I think it was important to understand this. It's a rather significant decision. So thank you for that. And stay there. So the next item on our agenda is an update on the general assistance and
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
My question is, do we want to
Also,
authorize any of
I
the
beg your
block grant?
pardon.
And two items were specifically identified. One was the 500,000 for the special accommodation grants, which were viewed as sort of time sensitive. And the other was the after-school building activities, building capacity there. So I just didn't want us to, do we want to take any action on at least, and can we split this out? I don't know. In terms of the mechanics of this, can we move out just
separately, or is there a need to do that?
at a
So
sub?
thank you for not letting me move on without talking about this. Representative Kornheiser?
I agree that it might be a good idea to move some sections of this. I'm curious if we slow down on the scholarships as well, if you're gonna still be able to be in compliance with 171, given the timeline that was laid out in there. And then also the special accommodation grants, and the after-school programs. I do have some concerns about the social emotional supports program and that I'd like to dive into more at some other time, but the rest of it seems very important to move forward in a timely way.
The 2.6 million in workforce supports has already been appropriated, so we're simply putting this plan, the continuation of that program over the coming state fiscal years. The special accommodation grants has not been appropriated as part of the budget, so unless this committee approves that, we would not be pushing forward. And then the other one that would be pivotal would be the transportation, as that has to be obligated. Those matching funds have to be obligated the end of this month, and I believe it's 789,000.
Okay, shall we take, so there are two items, there's the SAG grants and the transportation grants. There's the view that we've already appropriated. I agree with the education pieces. Rep. Kornheiser, I don't know where the social and emotional, et cetera, fits into the SAG or the transportation. I don't
It
think they
doesn't.
do.
It's
So
down
that's
at that
separate.
2.5.
Okay, so shall we have a discussion and an action on, let's do the SAG, the special accommodation grants first. So there's a proposal to add to the existing appropriation, which, what is this, 300,000, another 500,000 in additional SAG grants. Is there a motion to support that recommendation?
So moved.
Kornheiser moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion of that? Are you ready for the question? Okay, I think we are. So let's,
Okay, this is just the special accommodation grants,
yeah.
okay, of $500,000. All right. So Representative Ansel,
Yes.
Senator Balin,
Yes.
Representative Brigman,
Yes.
Senator Cummings,
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes, Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser. Senator Sears, again, is virtual, so cannot vote. Senator Westman
Yes.
and Representative Hooper.
Yes.
Again, 901 for the special accommodation grants of $500,000.
Thank you. And so the next question has to do with the transportation grants. This is like a unicorn. You keep trying to figure out how to save money there, and we can't do it, and we keep putting it back in the budget.
Yeah, and I think one of our, as we're proposing to spend, one of our, I think our limitations here is our inability to collect and analyze quality data in this area in terms of, and so this would kind of help us kind of perform a little study and try to understand it and figure out, are there efficiencies to be gained here? But certainly our RFP process was not successful.
That's been moving for you for 3 years now, I think. Yeah.
Well,
Or more.
eternal optimism.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
so let's put that one to rest. I'll move authorization. It was 715. Tell me the amount again.
793, I believe.
793,000. Childcare training.
Is there a second? Thank you. So again, you're writing fast, Rep. Fagan.
No, I get it.
Ready? Okay, please call.
Thank you. Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Senator Balin.
Yes.
Representative Brigman.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears, again virtual. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
901. Approved.
Okay, do we have anything else in this section that we have left undone?
To be clear, we will seek excess receipts for that spending authority within this fiscal year to move those funds prior to BAA.
I want to just say again, my worries about using one-time money for ongoing expenses and the expectations that we're creating. Hugely important, deeply thank you for bringing this proposal to us. And let's, fingers crossed that we continue to see the funds to cover these expenses after FY24. Ready to move on to the update on the general. So, and Ms. Gray, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time. I hope you're enjoying your work as the commissioner and interim commissioner. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity today.
Yeah, thank you. So update on the general assistance housing and your proposal to do additional transitional vouchers. Maybe we keep this brief.
Sure. As we were developing the working group, the proposal that ultimately was supported by the legislature is now law and was implemented July 1st. We knew there were a couple of big transition points in the program for those that we were serving during the pandemic, where at its height, we were serving just over 2,000 households in April of 2020. And so we went through the process on July 1st. So those households that did not have ongoing eligibility, when the new rules went into effect, received an essential payment of $2,500, which was really useful in helping the household land on their feet. In addition, they also had access up to $8,000 per household for rapid resolution funds. We also knew, based on our work, that motel capacity would continue to be a challenge for this program, and that was kind of what helped inform the parameters of the proposal that was submitted to the legislature. we anticipate we'll have about 650 motel rooms available in October. Right now, we're at around 900 and we're having challenges providing housing to everyone seeking it right now. We've had challenges for the last several weeks for about 60 households seeking services that we had no place, motel capacity to serve them. And so we know that many of the households that had eligibility under the new rules on July 1st are approaching their 84-day maximum under the new program guidelines. And when working with a work group, and there's still housing challenges out there, just as there were in July. We didn't plan for the central payment for those households. However, it's working with understanding that we're just not in a position with the motel capacity challenges we have to extend their stays. Where we're at now, we are proposing a $2,500 central payment for households that will be exhausting their 84-day housing in the coming weeks. And so we anticipate that there'll be about 543 households that will be exiting the program and eligible for that payment. So we've actually started, given the timing, we have started the process of this program, but wanted to bring it to the committee's attention. And that's why I reached out to the chairs of the appropriation, just to provide this update and make you aware of some of the work that's going on in this program and its current status.
Thank you. So this is not an action item, but I thought that it should be on the agenda. To be clear, the 84-day clock is up next week, and we're going to see another significant exodus of folks from the program, from the housing program. That is the plan that was in place back in May when we were looking at the virus consequences of it going down. Again, we don't have an action here, but I personally am deeply concerned about sticking to a plan that is likely to put a large number of people essentially back on the streets, because we know there is no housing available. I can say that in central Vermont, we know that at least 40 people are not housed out of the last group, and we are expecting to see the same number of people not having housing. When the Delta variant was not with us, I think that was a tolerable plan. Under today's circumstances, I personally am just deeply worried, and would hope I appreciate the essential payment, but I don't think that solves the problem. For some other solution.
And we agree, and we share those concerns. And so a lot of work is also happening behind the scenes as we support these households transitioning out. I'm also very concerned about the cold weather months that are coming upon us, and realizing I believe we're going to lose even more motel capacity in the coming months and be below what we anticipated we'd see through the winter, creating further challenges for the program as well, and how homeless households. As we relax the rules under the adverse weather, we would want to house more households, but motel capacity again is going to be a limiting factor. So we are working to see if we can locate and stand up temporary shelter system this winter and in the coming months to provide capacity for a place for homeless households to go. So we've reached out and we're talking with the Vermont League of City and Towns and municipalities to try to locate facilities that would meet the needs for that. We're also talking to our providers about who could step up to provide the services, because that's a key component of that. I'll be honest with you, many of our providers are stretched thin. And I think the other feedback we've gotten, just like CVOEO, Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, really ramped up and did an outstanding job of providing services at the Holiday Inn, where we master lease that came offline, is being renovated and by its owners. We know how long to access. But they lost those staffing in that program, and to stand it back up and then with the thought of tearing it back down if it ends in the fall. So I think those are some of the conversations we're having about how do we sustain some of these programs longer term than just a short term, because it really creates a lot of challenges for our partners and us in terms of trying to plan and staff and operate these systems on that type of basis and thinking a little bit more longer term. So we are working hard behind the scenes to make sure that we look at every opportunity that we have to expand some sort of shelter capacity in the state in the coming months to meet the need, because the hotels, although we are seeing the Delta variant is obviously there and the impacts, we know that. However, it's not impacting the pressures on the motel system, which travel and tourism is still very strong. Some of them are being purchased and coming offline and being converted into permanent housing, and it's not a one-for-one switch. We're also seeing, a lot of contractors and other workers coming in from other states to help meet the need here, are taking those up. And then also we're now competing with the healthcare and the mental health system, who are bringing in a lot of traveling nurses and staff. And they're also putting pressure on the motel system because they need a place to stay as well. And so there are all these forces on there really reducing capacity, not virus. And so we need to look elsewhere to try to meet the needs and be as creative as possible, as quickly as possible.
Representative Kornheiser.
There are absolutely areas of the state that do not have motel capacity challenges, though. And so it seems to me that you could focus your problem-solving energy and the one-time payments in those areas of the state that do have motel capacity challenges, and the areas of the state that don't have motel capacity challenges could stay in the same status that they are, with those people safely housed and protected from the Delta variant. And so I'm curious why you're seeking this one-size-fits-all solution in a state where we have such different challenges and different.
I don't think we are looking for a one-size-fits-all. As a financial, please excuse if I sound bureaucrat, but
It's fine, you're a bureaucrat.
At the department, we run financial eligibility programs, and this is one of those. And those have always had a series of rules of who's eligible and what benefit do you get. And there are a lot of constitutional and legal principles of why that is. And, equal, and so that's one of our concerns. We just cannot, we cannot say, we're not going to serve you here as part of the state, but you're going to get served in this part of the state. Like in the winter, we will avail ourselves of every available winter adverse weather because the rules are relaxed once again. And anyone who's eligible is. So we will be utilizing every available room. And we use those now if someone's willing to move. Like if we're not able to serve someone in Burlington and we say, hey, we have a room in Brattleboro, many families say no, even if we can get them there, they don't want to be moved from their home communities and isolated that way. And so that's not a resource for us to use because the families chose not to avail themselves of it. So those are the dynamics that we work in, and it's incredibly complicated and challenging for sure. But we will be utilizing that capacity that exists in some areas of the state. But in the areas of the state where we are seeing the immense pressures, like in Burlington, we are regularly out of capacity on a nightly basis, and that's our biggest district where we see the most pressure.
Senator Baylor.
Did you have a follow-up?
I beg your pardon.
I can go after you.
So I just want to make sure I understand, because several times you talked about standing up more shelters or congregate settings. I'm just trying to understand. We know that we have FEMA funding available through the end of the year that could pay to house people and keep them in the motels that they're in. I mean, we're from the same district. We know.
Understood. And that's
so I'm showing up as a member of this committee, but also like we're talking regularly with our providers, people on the ground saying, we need an extension. We need an extension. We have the rooms and FEMA can cover it.
This is not a money issue. We have all of them. We have ample financial resources, notwithstanding the FEMA money. We were appropriated close to $30 million in other federal money. So all we're doing is swapping one federal source now to support this program from another. It's really about motel capacity. And while we have that capacity today, we will not have it in 2 weeks because the foliage season is coming upon us, and our motels that we work with have told us that they are taking rooms offline from our program to serve travelers and tourists. Some have said, we'll stay with you, but you're going to be charged higher rates, and we're happy to pay those higher rates to keep that capacity. But we cannot control the decisions of private businesses. And so we have 900 rooms today. I think we're going to have about 650 in several weeks as the tourist season and foliage season comes up here. And I believe we will even have less available when the ski season happens. So within that dynamic, it's hard to say we'll extend someone 3 months when I can't guarantee I'll have a room for them in 3 days.
Sounds like a bigger challenge than just your department. This is a public health issue. And it should say it's not the money, it's how you create capacity or what you have for contingency planning if you're experiencing.
And to be honest, for the committee's knowledge, I mean, this has been a challenge in the system before the pandemic, and why we've been approaching saying we need to expand our community resources and coming every year with that proposal, and it's not really gained any traction because we have been running out of motel rooms for several years now in many areas of the state during this time of year in the winter with ski season are our biggest challenges, and we're heading into that season now. And given the need we're seeing.
Representative Kornheiser.
So towards that point, I know historically people have been eligible for the cold weather exception. It's been granted, and then they have not had a motel room available, and everyone sort of problem solves from there. And so I'm curious why you wouldn't stay with that sort of plan, saying you are still eligible for a motel room because it is still the middle of a pandemic, even though we keep on talking about it ending. We will do our very best to find a motel room for you, acknowledging that there are areas of the state where that's going to be problematic, and there will be backup plans from that, the same way you've done for years. I know this is not ideal. I know we need more housing. We're trying to build it, but to refuse eligibility because the next step might not be perfect, I don't think.
I don't think we're refusing eligibility. That person was found eligible. They've exhausted the number of benefit that they were entitled to under the program, which was put in place. Conversely, what do I say to the 60 families who are not serving now, who are trying to come into this system, who are currently fleeing domestic, lost their housing for other reasons? Because I don't know, as someone who's run programs for several years, that's not a dynamic that you want to find yourself in.
No.
So and so we're trying to manage an incredibly difficult situation and support households the best we can within the resource limitations that we have. Your point is well taken, but we can't run a program where you say, oh, we have a room just opened up here, so you're not eligible, we'll give it to you. Because what about the other 30 people who are eligible that come in the door tomorrow that might need that room? I mean, I don't want to sound bureaucratic, but our programs have for a reason to determine who gets served and for how long. And we're trying to stay true to that, but also make sure we're meeting everyone's needs who are maxing out of their days. And we believe, based on our experience, that the $2,500 payment, that's a resource we have. We have the funds available to do that payment. I do not have a resource of motel rooms to continue to serve everyone there today, tomorrow, the next week, or the next month. And that's our struggle today.
Senator Cummings?
Yeah. I know we've heard stories of difficulties with having some homeless clients housed in motels, just issues because of issues they have. We're talking about providing a room at a higher cost. Have we seen any issues with having homeless people and tourists in the same motel? And is there any provision I can remember reading a review when I was going somewhere and there were things about bring a gun because there's drug trades going on in the hall. I don't want to see Vermont. Yeah, how are we dealing with that issue?
So as a part of, the work with the legislature and the program that went into place, there are rules regarding, what happens if someone violates a hotel room or is arrested for a crime while they're in hotels. There's a gradation of how we approach that. And we certainly have seen some challenging circumstances in the motel system with the households we're serving. We're still experiencing some challenges. And we do our best to work with local community, law enforcement and town leadership in the motels to address those concerns as they arise. And our commitment is that we will continue to do that. And then where appropriate, someone does lose access to the program if what happened rises to that type of level.
Thank you. I admire the work, understand how tremendously difficult it has been over the past almost 2 years now. The plan we had in May made sense in May, and it personally does not make sense to me anymore. And I think what we're all asking is to find another solution. I'm particularly worried. I know we hear, oh, the Delta variant is, it's going to start going down, but that's not what we're seeing. And to be looking at vulnerable people being placed in an even more precarious health situation is really worrisome. And just saying we don't have enough hotel rooms is.
And that's why a lot of our energy right now behind the scenes is
Yeah.
to develop those other strategies and resources to serve folks who are losing their eligibility now, but also as we come into the future months, it's crucial that we have resources available. And unfortunately, the motels are not meeting that need and will be able to. And so we're shifting our energy just to as we've done in other years, standing up extreme cold weather pop-up shelters. It's in that spirit that we're trying to.
I understand that. The fear is we're not talking the cold weather. We're talking in 2 weeks when people are precariously housed, the impact on them, but on public health in general. So it's not just what are we going to do later, it's what we're doing now. I know you know that, but we have to say how strongly we feel about the need to find a plan now to solve this. So we look forward to, continuing the conversation. At least I hope folks are realizing that the essential grant that they're receiving can be used to purchase a hotel room. And I hope that you're having that conversation strongly with people so that they realize they can use it that way. So I think I probably said enough on this and can move on. So thank you for that. The next item on the agenda, and I'm afraid we're not going to release you, but I think Josh Hanford, Commissioner Hanford, is going to talk to us about the status of the rental assistance program. And again, we just wanted an update, and Commissioner Hanford, maybe you can just be really quick because you can see that we've totally blown through our timing here. So thank you for joining us. He is joining us via video.
Yes, Chair.
There we go.
Good morning. Actually, I have 2 items on the agenda. One of them is the homeownership assistance fund,
Yes.
which could be very brief. There was a memo submitted by Vermont Housing Finance Agency and myself that gives you the status. We're waiting for Treasury to approve our plan, just like every other state in the country. In the meantime, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency has received the initial payment, $4.5 million. We entered into a grant agreement with them, and they have selected a vendor through an RFP process and developed a microsite to start testing eligibility and having people learn about the program when it becomes available. And that's about all the update that's needed on that program, unless you have questions.
I'm not seeing any, so thank you.
So
Whoops,
at
yes,
this point, no assistance has been paid out in terms of this particular program. We're still in the organizational implementation phase. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. The initial payment was just for administration costs to set programs up. We haven't been authorized to release any mortgage payment assistance yet.
And it is still contingent on, as you said, Treasury approval.
We submitted our plan last month, and there's been no state in the country that has been approved by Treasury yet. We check the website every day, and we'll let you know as soon as we receive approval.
Representative Brickland?
Commissioner, can you remind me how large this program would potentially be in Vermont and how long we would have to allocate the funds? And the reason I'm asking the question is I'm concerned that there's going to be significantly less interest or uptake in this program than maybe we'd originally thought. And is there a possibility of directing these funds elsewhere, maybe where they're more needed?
Great question. Our total allocation is $50 million. And the plan that was developed sort of laid out sort of a prioritization of those funds. Unfortunately, from the sort of forbearance data and information we have from mortgage service providers, we think that these funds are going to be exhausted within 2.5, 3 years. We have, I think, 4 years, 4.5 years to spend the funds. If that's not the case, we can put some of this money towards other eligible uses in the plan, such as making essential repairs to qualifying homeowners that may have, let's say, leaky roofs or other health safety issues. But as sort of the triage of eligible uses, we want to assist people with their mortgage payments and their property tax payments and their utility payments that would prevent any sort of foreclosure or action against them first. If that proves to be more money than needed, the housing agency is planned to shift and make those funds available for those essential home repairs for eligible applicants as well.
Is there overlap between this program and the arrearages program that we've appropriated money for elsewhere?
Yes, so the legislature has appropriated 2 chunks of CRF money to pay for mortgage arrearages. It totals $10 million together, and those funds have all been spent, all been out the door at this point. And in fact, the last payments were just made, recently. So this program coming online, we hope by October, getting approval from the Treasury, won't leave much of a gap for folks without any ability to receive help, paying their mortgage. Yeah, that's sort of all the information I have on that.
I may have been mixing something up. I thought that there was the ability with this funding to support homeowners behind on utility arrearages, but I was maybe mixing up my arrearages.
Correct. There's several utility arrearages programs through Public Service Department, and it's sort of related also to the next update about the emergency rental assistance, because there's also several pots to pay for utility assistance that makes it a little confusing. And you're right, the Homeowner Assistance Fund has utility assistance provided, but the plan is not to turn that on until it's needed, because there's still CRF utility assistance available through Public Service Department that has a much shorter time frame to spend it this December.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this? And so the next program.
Well, I do, Josh, to clarify, the homeowner assistance program that we're talking about here being set up comes with different requirements. This has the income test, et cetera, that we did not have to worry about when we were setting up the CRF funded program?
The CRF funded program for
Does this
mortgage,
have an income test? Not have an income test?
this new program does have an income test, but it goes up to 120% AMI, I believe, with a priority for folks below 80% AMI. So it'll be, prioritized for those with the lowest incomes first.
Thanks.
So I'm a little bit lost on the agenda. So we have been talking about the emergency rental assistance, and now we have this.
No, we've been talking about
We've got the
homeowner
other-
assistance.
Okay,
Now
so
we're
did
back
this-
to rental.
Okay. I'm doing this sequentially. That was second. Okay, so we're good on the homeowner assistance program. No more questions. So back to the emergency rental assistance program.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief here as well, although there's a lot more information here to cover and a lot more funding. At a very high level, I want to make the committee aware of the amount of new housing resources that have been provided in response and recovery of COVID-19. To date, there's been about $819 million of new housing resources at all types available, and we've already spent about 280 million of those. This is for building housing, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, everything. It just wanted to give you the full scope, and we've assisted over 41,000 households to date of all these housing resources, and built over 900 units of housing. When we get to the rental assistance program, to date, the total of all funding, CRF, Emergency Rental Assistance 1, Emergency Rental Assistance 2, it's about $420 million that is available in all forms for all types of assistance to help those that rent in need. And then to drill down what we've done and what we've put out the door and what's still available, we need to go back to CRF funding. We made $25 million of CRF funding available for rental arrearages. And of that, 24 million was directly used to help pay rental assistance, rental arrearage. And it took about 7 months to move that money. That was money that the legislature appropriated long before ARPA was even thought of, long before the December stimulus bill was thought of. We identified folks would need help paying their rent way back in the beginning of the pandemic. And we stood up a program that had very little, bureaucratic sort of challenges for people to get through. And it was widely viewed as a very successful program, easy to access. And in 7 months, we spent $24 million on that program. Along with that, there was utility assistance through Public Service Department, and that's still ongoing. Those funds still remain, but to date, we've spent about 13 million on rental assistance through the CRF utility arrearage program. So we then now shift to the December 2020 stimulus bill, which came out with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, ERAP 1. We sought approval from this committee to stand that program up, and it was launched in mid-April 2021. That total pot available is $210 million. To date, in 5 months, that program was launched in, like I said, mid-April. In 5 months, that program has put out $25 million in rental assistance through the Vermont State Housing Authority as the administrator in a program they call VRAP, Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Another 5 million of those ERAP funds through DCF's Reach Up program to pay rent, and about 1.4 million in utility assistance from that same source. So I just wanted to put in perspective that although this program, we've heard lots of stories, both nationally in Vermont about how challenging this program has been to access and sort of the rules that Treasury put, which have been since revised in the last few weeks to make it more accessible. The fact is more money is moved through that program in a shorter amount of time than the CRF program that had less rules. And, Kathleen Burke is here, the executive director, to get into details if you have questions. But that program is moving more than $1 million a week and is serving households across the state and landlords. There are no questions that there's been challenges. I'm sure you've heard from your constituents about them, but there are hundreds of folks working on this in various community partner organizations across the state, trying to fix the challenges of this program. And one other important information I want to get across is, the measure that we've been looking at that has been reported across the country is percentage spent of this program as a metric of success. I think that's rather challenging considering Vermont, just from this one program, received $210 million as a small state set aside. And the city of Memphis, Tennessee, which has a larger population than Vermont, only received $24 million. We have a very large pot of funding to spend, and using percent expended of our allocation is not the correct measure of success. In my view, we should be talking about the folks that are served, addressing the need. And in fact, when we project out all eligible folks in Vermont that could access these funds and receive a maximum benefit from these funds across the Vermont State Housing Authority program, it totals about 55 million. Across the Reach Up program, it totals about 11 million. And across the utility arrearage program, their estimate is about another 11 million. So we're going to have funds remaining in this program, most likely. And on top of that, we have an additional $152 million of ERAP2 funding that we need to apply for by March 2022. Likely will come back to this committee, maybe in a meeting November, December, or the beginning of the legislative session, to talk about accessing those funds at a time when this 210 million still has a remaining balance. So that is a lot of information. I know it is, and I'm sure there's a ton of questions. So I'll stop there and see if we can help answer them.
Okay, thank you. A while ago, Rep. Fagan had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Commissioner, if you have the other program you were talking about, the homeowner assistance, you indicated 88% of the packets were deemed eligible. I'm going to presume that you also have requests in this program, the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program, that also are eligible, not eligible. What are you doing to follow up on the not eligible to make sure that that assessment is correct? And or if you have a packet that is deemed fraudulent, and that's I'm going to talk about that in a moment more. If you have a packet that's deemed fraudulent, what are you doing to follow up on that to make sure that your assessment is correct and it wasn't just a mistake at the other end?
Yes, I'm actually going to hopefully turn this over to Kathleen to address those specific questions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen Burke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Housing Authority. Thank you for asking me to be with you today. With regard to your question about fraudulent applications, that is a concern. It's good for you to know that our process includes a very detailed quality control process. We have not only our vendor that does regular quality control, but also staff here at the Vermont State Housing Authority that's looking very closely at suspicious applications and following up on those appropriately. And it is, as the program sort of continues and the Treasury makes the rules more flexible, it is becoming more and more of a concern, but you can be assured that that's something that we're looking at very closely and that we take very seriously. With regard to denied applications, sort of a similar response in that we have a very tight quality control process. We're reviewing those regularly. Also, applicants are afforded the opportunity to request an appeal if they disagree with the decision that was made on their application. And more times than not, if an applicant comes forward and requests an appeal and they're able to provide documentation to support their eligibility, then certainly that application would be deemed eligible.
Thank you. My concern is, yes, my concern is quality control to make sure that we do this right, such that when we are audited, we aren't told we got to pay back a whole bunch of money. By the same token, we have Vermonters in need, and I want to make sure that funding for those that are eligible gets out the door. So, Mr. Hanford, I'm going to be sending you, I mentioned the fraudulent piece. I had a person not in my district, close to my district, who is a landlord, reach out to me and ask me about a tenant, not in my district, but close to my district. That's okay. About a situation where this tenant was assisted with filling out a packet. The folks that filled it out then sent in that packet along with a piece of somebody else's packet. It was deemed fraudulent, denied, and she has gotten nowhere with being able to follow up on it. So I'm going to send to you all the pertinent information about both individuals, and I'm going to ask for a response back as soon as you figure it out. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure Kathleen could attest to this, but we both and many others get emails daily of applications that have gone haywire somewhere, and very tough situations that also can't be assisted. I have several of your colleagues that send me information about landlords that a tenant has moved out and they weren't evicted, but they've moved out and haven't left a large loss that hasn't been paid. And how are they eligible for the program? And the fact is they're not. The tenant has to apply and choose to pay back rent for a previous location for those landlords to be compensated. In fact, that's one of the areas in legislation. Maxine Waters, a very strong housing advocate, is pushing for change to this program in DC, recognizing that without satisfying landlords that have suffered tens of thousands of dollars in losses with the available funding in this program, because there will be available funding, we're going to lose more housing. And it's going to hurt the very people that we all want to help provide housing if we can't address those situations. But right now, the law does not allow us to pay those lost rents if the tenant does not choose to allocate a portion of their maximum 15 months of benefit towards a previous residency.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brown, I think, had some insight here.
Yes, I just want to point out for the committee's information as well is that we did receive some ERAP funding, some to support reach out families with rental assistance, but also to fund services to help Vermonters to access the program. So we've issued out about $4 million to about 21 community partners that helps fund outreach to eligible Vermont households, make sure they're aware and can access the program. Direct services support and kind of applying and accessing the program, landlord tenant mediation and support services, landlord outreach and education, housing navigation services, and also we're funding legal aid to provide legal services to applicants as well, households as well. And so also if there's a household that reaches out to you or a constituent and about who do I reach for assistance, give us a shout and we can connect them to the provider. Sometimes it's complex accessing our systems.
Just got CC'd.
Senator Kitchell, this triggers a thought. The other group of very low income households, I mean, obviously these are supplemental payments to reach up families that are being made.
Yes, we're actually paying their rent. So for households that have a rental obligation, we're making their monthly rent payments for that.
And I suppose you don't have the same amount, but we have another, it's the SSI where we pay a state supplement. And these are very low income, either elderly or people with disabilities receiving this benefit. Is there any thought about some kind of, like you're doing for reach but the problem is that's a federal administered supplement, so it gets into problems. So I was just wondering.
We know who those households are. I mean, because of the AABE program.
Right.
SSI households.
Yeah.
And so I can talk with Josh and to see about if we can identify those households and see if some of them are already participating, and if not, is there a way that we could maybe
Do
both?
some kind of a supplemental benefit, because it seems to me that we have another group of very low income Vermonters that are receiving what used to be a state benefit, the old AABD. It's a supplement now administered by the feds. My other question was, I've heard that in fact, because you have income requirements for the rental assistance, that the money has gone out, but a large share of it has gone out to individuals who are in subsidized or public housing, because they've been very good about supporting the application process, and not so much to the private landlords. Do you could you just, is that common based in fact, or are you seeing a different take-up rate depending on the nature of the rental arrangement?
Is that question directed for me?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
That's the experience, or no, it's not. So I guess probably you, Kathleen.
Yes, I will agree that it is the experience, and that was our experience with the rental housing stabilization program as well.
So that's where assistance for the application process is really so important for this other group.
Yes, and one piece I left out, Commissioner Brown mentioned it, but we do have a good share of these funds going towards these other housing stability services. Over 40 community partners have received grants to help folks submit applications, get the word out. Legal Aid, Vermont Landlords Association, all have grants to help folks access these funds. And I think there are a fair share of folks that are housed in public housing or nonprofit housing that have maybe better communication with their owners, their landlords, if you will, and have staff that have been received funds to help fill out these applications. So they are perhaps getting better service. But there also was success in the first round, and I think we'll see it at the end. When you look at the landlords served, there was a large percentage of landlords served that were only owned 1 to 4 units in the first round when we were able to collect the data. And feedback was that it literally saved them from going bankrupt and losing their property, the program. So I believe we can check into the data a little more detail and try to see what percentage, what size of property owners are receiving these payments. It's also helpful for the committee to know that if a landlord chooses not to participate, the tenant can still receive the funds directly. And then they can choose to pay that rent, or they're supposed to pay that rent with the funds they receive directly. So this program really doesn't have an opt-out for landlords. It just has the extra challenge that if the tenant has vacated and refuses to participate, they're left without any recourse, and they're left with those losses that may end up resulting in those units shut down at a time when we can't afford to have any units offline.
Thank you. I think we need to bring this to conclusion. We could talk a lot more about it, but thank you all for your work. Commissioner Brown, before you leave, I'm afraid we need to just for a moment come back to what we thought we had finished. I believe that we, when we were talking about the stabilization grants and the program, that we may have omitted, and I don't know if it was intentional on our part, the support for childcare and after-school capacity building.
That was 1.8.
Yes, 1.8 there and 500,000 for business training. I do not believe that was part of our motions.
No.
And was that intentional on our part? My guess is particularly after school. So there were 2 other elements of your proposed plan. And I'm referring to page 3 of the plan that you presented to us, the 500,000 for business training support for childcare. This was one of the things that evidently was highlighted in your analysis. It's work with the community, and 1.8 million for childcare and after-school capacity building activities in the forms of grants and activities for additional slots and hours. So if someone would, if there is an interest in making sure that is attended to, would someone care to make a motion on that? Senator Cummings, is there a second? Rep. Kornheiser, is there any discussion?
And this is all out of the Child Care Development Block Grant. Okay. No.
It was the Child Care Development Block Grant Supplement authorized under ARPA.
Yeah.
So yes. Ready for, please call the roll. Or the,
And just to be clear, this is the $500,000 for business training support for childcare, and that's for FY22, FY23, and 1.8 million for childcare and after-school capacity building activities FY22 and FY23 from the ARPA-funded Child Care Development Block Grant. Representative Ansel.
yes. Yes.
Senator Balin.
Yes.
Representative Brigland.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears is virtual. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
They're approved 901.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what we may do on our end is just, given that some of those funds have been allocated out in 171, we've now allocated out some through this process today, is that maybe do a quick letter to this committee in the coming weeks, just kind of summarizing how much funds were allocated from the federal government and what's been authorized to be spent on what, and that way we can identify what's left. So for the coming session or whatever process will come, that we understand kind of the baseline where we're starting from now.
That we're all in agreement on what that baseline is. Yeah, perfect.
We're kind of allocating funds in many different ways.
And obviously copies to JFO and
Yes.
the relevant chairs of the
Absolutely.
relevant committees. Yeah, subject matter committees. Okay. Thank you very much. Folks, I am so sorry about where we are on the agenda. It's just the nature of the business that we have before. So the next item is, and this is an action item, it's the discussion of the capital incentive grant program. And Jones is here with us in person. And Commissioner Goldstein is, I think, going to join us via video along with Tom Cavett, but Mr. Jones will, and your sheet, that is not Jones.
That's Joan.
That's Joan.
Yes.
If I put
Yeah.
glasses on, I see it is Joan. Hi. Thank you. Thank you.
Joan's got a new bob. We don't have Tom.
And we don't have Tom. Is he?
But we have
but
Ken
he's
and
here
Tom.
now. Okay. There's Tom. Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you for joining us. Commissioner Goldstein, who's up first?
I will cue this up. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. I think it's still morning. This is pursuant to Act 74, the guidelines as put forth for the capital investment program. The procedure is that we were to work with the legislative economists to come up with a net fiscal impact model. That model is to be used as one of the criteria for determining the recipients of the capital investment grant program. The capital investment grant program, as we recall, it was 10 million. Do I have the number right? 10,480,000. Sorry, I just moved into a new house yesterday. I'm a little bit of disarray. But the idea is that we would utilize the net fiscal impact model as one of the criteria, but also it is a cap on the amount that a particular applicant can get. And the idea as set forth in this legislation is that we are to come before you to describe the model and methodology, and so that we could move forward to come up and solicit proposals for the next quarter and be in a position to fund. So I think that's where I'll leave it, and I think Ken is up next, and Tom in conjunction, because this has been collaborative effort. So thank you.
Thank you. And I see we're also joined by Steve Carr, so welcome.
Yes.
Jeff,
Jeff Carr.
beg your pardon. Jeff,
Yes.
thank you. So you turn it over to Mr. Jones.
Sure. So I am Ken Jones. I'm the Economic Research Analyst at the Agency of Commerce. And as the legislation asked, we're working with the legislative economist, and we, being ACCP, also use the administration's economist, which is Jeff Carr. And that's important because Jeff and Tom know the basis of these models from their origins. That is the basis of this model for the capital investment program, is to use a similar approach as we use for the veggie program, which is to look at the economic impact from a proposed activity and use the REMI model, which takes economic inputs and determines what the change in the Vermont economy is. And so just like with veggie, it looks at personal income, looks at the consumption of goods and services, and looks at property values. And those become the basis running through the second half of the model to look at the revenue impacts for the state. Personal income translates to income tax, consumption values translate to the consumption taxes, property values translate to the state property tax. So we're going to use the same basis for this program, recognizing that there are additional factors that the legislation outlines in terms of some of the social impacts that programs may establish, but also that the investment in a private sector activity can lead to things other than employment changes, can lead to productivity changes. So through the application process, and an application process which will be probably announced today, but will be initiated early next week, the applicants will also provide information on how this activity may lead to additional sales and additional sales of their goods and services, but also additional sales of the goods and services they need to expand their business, expand the economic activity. And we'll attempt to use that information in addition to understand the economic impact. So we'll start with the model. And as we get, the application phase is going to have, the application process is going to have two phases. One gives us some preliminary information so that we can test out how best to use that information in a consistent fashion, so that the final application process will highlight the information we need to be able to thoroughly evaluate each of the applications to get at that bottom line figure, net revenue, net state revenue, which will be a basis and criteria for choosing the projects, but also will serve as a cap on the dollar value of the grants provided. So I'll ask Tom if you want to weigh in. If I went too quickly and missed some pieces, if you want to weigh in on that, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Ken. And good morning, still barely, to everybody. I just want to emphasize that, you know, the proposal before you is sort of a framework for proceeding. It's not like all the I's have been dotted or T's crossed. There's a technical review group which is formed, which consists of myself and Nick Rockler and Ken and Jeff Carr and Bob Chase at Economic and Policy Resources. That's somewhat similar to how we did a modified version of the REMI model and the cost benefit model in evaluating potential anchor employers. That was a process started right before the pandemic hit. And we did a review looking at global foundries, also on a consensus basis. And, you know, had to change a lot of things in the cost benefit model in order to make it applicable. And there'll be cases where we need to do that with this model also. So it's the proposal outlines a process that when we see actual applications and we then look through the issues that arise in terms of economic inputs, we'll make recommendations for how you know, similar sorts of things could be done. But there'll be a different applicant pool and different kinds of applications. So there's still work to be done by this review group in figuring out exactly what model inputs will be used and how that'll work.
Thank you. Representative Kornheiser.
Thanks. Do you have a sense of when the review group will be aware if the social benefit impacts can be modeled, or if you have already made a decision about sort of defaulting to that as a secondary screen?
Well, I think that's going to depend on what social benefit impacts need to be modeled. So there have been a couple of hypotheticals thrown out. Daycare centers, something like that. There's a lot of academic literature on how that affects labor force participation. So that's something that's quantifiable and, something in the model that we could input. There are other issues with that. I mean, any particular application that we take or class of application is going to have some issues that need to be considered. So with daycare, on the one hand, you've got potentially something that will allow more workers to be a part of the labor force. That's a plus. But you also have to consider cannibalization of other daycare firms. If you're giving money to one daycare provider in an area, you don't want to create jobs there and take them away from another. So there has to be some review of, what the demand is locally and whether that's provided currently. So that another wrinkle with daycare is just that the way economic statistics value paid child care providers versus parents is something that you want to take into consideration. Right now, parents' labor to provide childcare services is not counted in GDP. So that's, just from a typical modeling approach, that has zero value. When you substitute that with a childcare provider who's paid and a worker in the economy, that parent that goes to work, it looks like it's hugely beneficial because of that. And yet there needs to be some accounting for the fact that essentially there is a service being provided by a parent as well. There may also be qualitative differences in that as well. Anyway, that's just down in the weeds kind of complications of doing it, but we'll attempt to take those things into consideration in measuring that fiscal impact.
It would help me to know how much time you're trying to recapture on our agenda.
Well, we are now an hour late, so it is much up to you as to how much time you have. And we have several other items here to proceed through. But we need to do our work properly. So are there additional questions on this? This is an action item. Senator Kitchell?
I don't have the expertise to begin to pull this apart. We had some interesting exchange. Just take this, the veggie analytical process, the change is gauged using a hybrid regional economic model, in which input-output model operates at the core of partial equilibrium model. So I have to say, I have no capacity other than I would have to have trust that the people who work with these models, including two of our, our legislative and the executive branch state economists, have given this careful attention. I think what we really want to make sure is that we have at least the best capacity we can, that if we're making these investments, that we have what people have confidence is a way of measuring them to the extent we can.
And
so that's all I can say.
Yeah, to provide some comfort, the REMI model, that long list of adjectives that don't make a lot of sense to a lot of people.
This partial equilibrium, I mean, I feel like I'm in,
And you
whatever.
should, and you should. And economists I think I'm allowed to disclose, I am not an economist, okay? And I think that's one of the reasons I have the position I have. Is that, and sorry, Tom and Jeff, but the thing is, we've used the REMI model now for a long time, hundreds of applications. So we build our capacity to understand what it does, what it does not do. And so that, the only comfort that I can provide is we're not starting fresh here. We are using something that we have used. We understand its limitations, but we understand what it does give us to provide some information.
Well, my comfort is we have Tom and Jeff who are given this
And they've been using.
imprimatur of approval.
Representative Ansel?
I'm not sure who to ask the question of. This is not a program that went through our committee. This went through the Appropriations Committee or
And economic
Commerce
development drop.
So if somebody can clarify for me, I can read that it's $10 million. I assume that that's some ARPA money. I don't know that. And is there an anticipation that once the money is gone, we're done? Or are we thinking this is going to be extended indefinitely, in which case I would have many more questions.
That's Joan question.
But then,
Yeah. Sorry, did I interrupt you, the rest of your line of questioning, Representative Ansel?
no, I think you probably got the gist of it.
Great. So yeah, this was 10 million and I think it's 480. Sorry that I don't have that exact number. I could look that up, but it's it was ARPA, 100% ARPA funded. So on top of what we're doing here with the model and the methodology, it also has to pass the ARPA eligibility test. As to whether or not this will be ongoing, we don't know. I think that it's fair to say the Senate Economic Development Committee agreed to this as a sort of a trial to see what types of projects we would fund, what type of method and methodology, what type of model and what kind of outcomes we would get. To refresh everyone's memory, the governor did ask on this program for $90 million, and this is a portion of that. So the funds need to be spent down by December of 24, or I guess it's obligated by December of 24 and spent down by 26. So as to whether it's ongoing, I don't know, but for all intents and purposes, this was the one.
There's no commitment for ongoing. This was ARPA, it was on the long list of wishes and
yes,
along with so many of the other business grants, et cetera. So I will tell you that from the appropriations perspective in the Senate, this was one time ARPA funded and not with any understanding. If it proves itself and in fact is better than what we have in place, maybe we need to look at, should we make modifications and, do some replacement or some modifications of what we have for funding that's in the base, but absolutely no commitment or understanding of that.
I'll just affirm that is equally true on our side of the building. And this was a component of the economic development bill that did travel in the budget, but was the product of work of the two economic development committees. I asked if this accomplished what we understood was to be accomplished from our folks, and the answer was yes, from the Commerce Committee. But this seems to hit what they were looking for.
If I could jump back in, I'm slightly reassured, but not very. And I do have real concerns about approving a model within a model within a model, whatever that language was, with this group of people under these circumstances, without feeling more reassured than I am that it won't be, that there won't be efforts to continue. So I have some concerns about.
Thank you. And let's remember these concerns. I think this is similar to the conversation that we had around childcare, where we were making commitment for ongoing obligations using one-time money. And so continue that conversation. Representative Kornheiser?
Well, given that, given that we have short amount of time, what are the implications of us putting off this decision one round? When does the money need to be obligated?
Well, according to Act 74, we were meant to get this before you at September 1st. And we were meant to have a round of grants and I believe a report due back to the legislature by December 15th. So that would just delay everything. We'd have to get extensions on that. And the money would not be put out to use.
Is there additional information that we require in order to make a good decision here? Big, no, yeah. Senator Kitchell, are you? So a small question that I had, I was curious, and then somewhere in my reading of this, it looked like you're using, not using the most current census data in the modeling. It looked like it was, did I just misread that?
No, so the most recent REMI model does not use the census data. It uses I believe it's the 2019 population estimates. The impact on the outcomes is not large, and what it does is it changes the denominator for what the population is, but only the extent to which, if you had a bigger denominator, we'd have to change the numerator to make it equivalent. In other words, the size of the economy is not changed because of the census numbers. So it is, you're right, and it's not that large a difference also, it's a couple percent, but it doesn't make a difference in the way that the model is applied because the economy is the size of the economy. We allocate it to a smaller number of people because they don't use the census number.
Got it.
But
okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
May I ask, would it help the committee if there was more discussion about the inputs into the model? I don't know if that would help. You know, what would be required of each applicant in terms of job creation, capital investment, you know, what the project is intended to do?
I am guessing, and this is just guessing, that there's just a concern about a wholly new program that was, again, created in the budget, passed in the end days of legislative session. And I think many of us do not know that much about it, or we're not part of the conversations, and some concern about the consequence of essentially blessing this and what it means in the future. Representative Ansel?
Well, I think that's really my concern. I understand $10 million. I understand the need to move forward. I don't want to have my vote anyway be an indication that I think this is good for the long term. That I think this is something that we ought to do once this $10 million is gone. So that would be I think that's really what the concern is.
Now, let me just add.
Not a venue for having the kind of discussion that we ought to have to really understand whether this is the way we want to proceed. And the money is there, and I totally understand why there's interest in moving it out. But before we re-up a program like this, there needs to be a different kind of opportunity, possibly not in this committee, to understand that. Sorry, go ahead.
That you were.
Yeah, just to Representative Ansel's concerns, I share those, and I don't think the design for the model was expected to be supportive of a long-term program for a lot more money. There are time limits on all this, and we're trying to say, can we apply some additional evaluative data that tries to steer the money into the most impactful and beneficial places, but if this were to support some large ongoing sort of thing, I think there might be a very different model process and system for it. So I'm not really supportive of the notion that the work we've done on this to date would, support anything long-term, and that this is how we would design an evaluative process and measure things.
Thank you. So just as a reminder of the process, the legislature approved this proposal and directed that this be brought to us for our consideration of the model that's being developed. So we have a rather narrow obligation. I think several of us are expressing the concerns about the ongoing implications of that, but that is not what we are blessing with our action today. I think we're clear on that. So unless there's further discussion, Representative Senator.
No, I was going to move approval.
Would you care to make a motion?
Yeah, I would like to move approval.
Yeah, is there a second?
Second.
Actually, I have one more question.
And further discussion, Rep. Kornheiser?
Thank you. Has there been a conversation at all about the ability of the model to model negative social benefit, whatever the opposite of a social benefit is?
Yeah, disamenities. Yes,
Thank you.
that always goes. Yeah, that always goes hand in hand. When you're measuring positive externalities, is what we in modeling parlance, what you'd call it, is there also is consideration of negative externalities. Sometimes you can quantify them, sometimes you can't, but those need to be listed and registered as a part of an honest modeling process.
And will you be doing that for each application?
Well, hopefully, we'll see applications aggregate into certain types. So we would do it for types, but yes, initially, and again, not knowing exactly what applications are going to come before us, it's hard to say in advance, but yes, we would be doing that for each application, and then presumably they'll be sort of following in general categories, and those protocols can be used throughout a set of applicants.
And if I could just add again, just a thought here. This is ARPA funds, and what that means is this cannot just be used for general economic development projects. Each and every project will have to prove either COVID impact on the project, or be in a qualified census tract, or be in the hospitality sector. So there are tests that have to be met, not just what was set forth within Act 74. And I don't know if that gives further comfort that this is not a long-term recurring program. Also, about the negative impacts, the idea is that they have to prove that there's been negative impact already. This is ARPA recovery. This is recovery funds.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready for the question.
The one just comment, unlike the childcare plan, I noticed this communication didn't go back to the subject matter committee. So, but this is obviously the procedure that they put in place that was given to us to put into the budget. So I think we have to move forward relative to the December deadlines that you were saying were prescribed. So I don't know if there's anything more than just to make that note.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing other questions or comments. Rep. Fagan, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the motion is to approve the capital incentive grant program as presented, funded with $10 million of ARPA funds. Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Senator Balin.
Yes.
Representative Brigman.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears is virtual. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
We are 901.
You want to make that 10 million, whatever the
actual amount was.
580.
Can I just ask a question? Sorry. I noticed in the motion, it said to approve the program. is it technically that you're approving the model?
The model.
The model.
Yeah.
Grant model. So it would be the capital incentive grant model?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my motion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on the
Thank you.
agenda is yet another discussion about another model. So annually, I believe it's annually, we're required to look at a modification of the model that's used in the veggie program. And are you going to stay with us? And then we're also welcoming Megan Sullivan. Thank you for joining us with the BEPC, the Executive Director of BEPC. And Tom and Steve are going to stay with us, it looks like.
And Jeff.
And Jeff. So there was a Steve Carr who served here, and it's just permanent in my, I beg your pardon, Jeff. Yeah, Mr. Carr. So we'll turn it over to, are you going first, Ms. Sullivan? How are you?
Yeah, I mean, I can just do an introduction.
Okay.
Megan Sullivan, Executive Director for Vermont Economic Progress Council. Yes, typically pursuant to VSA 3326, the model used to measure economic benefit of proposed economic activity must be approved by Joint Fiscal Committee. This is the model that the council uses. We have typically come annually. The last year, we did not come in for a model adjustment, but prior to any adjustment, we need to have approval of a updated model by this committee. This is something that Ken has worked on with the model base that Tom and Jeff created when this program started in 2007, and updates are presented to Tom as well. So I can take it from there about Sarah's update.
Yeah, and every year, the majority of the changes are because the economy has changed. So things like tax rates, property values, we just try to keep the model up to date. And that every now and then we find some other things we wish to change. This time, though, the changes are based only upon those changes in the economy and change. So there is a list of the actual tax rate changes. I think more importantly is then use what the modified model is to then look at sample projects and determine, well, does it have a systematic change in the calculation of the benefit to actual applicants or hypothetical applicants? And I read through 4 or 5 this year, and it's usually within 5 or 10%, and sometimes it's less, and sometimes it's more. So I can say that no systematic increase in the calculation of the benefit that results as the result of these changes to the model.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I know we have
and-
a question. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Please
Go
go ahead, Mr. Cadet. I realized that I should have acknowledged that you need to respond to what is being proposed as part of this process.
Yeah, I think this is a lot simpler than the other models. So I just add that this process was skipped last year because of the COVID demands. So there was not a model update last year, but it's generally a perfunctory sort of process to the extent there's no model changes except an updating of information and use of a more current REMI model. There have been a few times that the REMI model made changes that indicated there were problems with the model. We went back to REMI and had them adjust and correct things. But this time, Nick Rockler and I have replicated all the runs that Ken has made and can confirm that the changes have no bias and it's best to update it. Just a word on the population numbers, even though those aren't in REMI, they are a part of our revenue forecasts that we do. We updated the demographics there, and they feed into things like CDAC calculations for rating review agencies and the like, where per capita numbers are important, and those are beneficial. They're not as impactful in terms of the way they work in the model.
Thank you. That's where I read about the census data. Yeah, thank you. Representative Ansel.
So this is a very basic question, and I'm sure there's a really good explanation, but looking at the chart and looking at the tax rates, they all make sense to me, except the sales and use tax rate. You get to 7.8%.
Yeah, so what happens is Remy gives a lot of different consumption categories, and we identify those consumption categories that are subject to sales tax and those that aren't, and only use those that are subject to sales tax to then take its estimate of annual consumption and apply it to the actual sales tax revenues. Because there are so many, by the time you go through them all, it's not entirely perfect. It's not perfect, but that imperfection in their baseline is carried through so that when you have an economic activity that increases sales, it increases those same imperfect categories. So you're right, that's not the sales tax rate, but it's the sales tax rate as it is applied to what Remy says is the amount of those sales taxable items.
Got
Yeah,
that, Janet?
No sense to me at all.
You want to try, Tom?
Basically, no, but basically, you cannot perfectly match the sales tax base in Vermont with what Remy considers to be retail sales consumption. And so this is the closest matching you can do. And the effective rate ends up being this rate. It's not, it's not trying to replicate the actual amount. There's no way to get a narrowing of all of the taxable and non-taxable categories in Vermont into the Remy model in an equivalent way.
It's a bridge, if you don't mind me projecting, it's a bridge to the Remy model so that we can use the Remy results where we're measuring just a change from the status quo. All these things are just differences from a baseline. And so we have a number of bridges where we try to translate those economic changes into tax revenues and also on the other side, the fiscal costs. We have a very robust fiscal cost side. It's an average cost function. And even though I'd like to take credit for developing the whole thing, I just want to remind the committee that this model was done collaboratively. And it was done collaboratively, at least 2 complete iterations almost from scratch over time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So this is also an action item. Would someone care to make a motion? Senator Cummings moves approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'm not seeing any. If you call the roll, please.
And the motion is to approve the annual update of the veggie model. Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Senator Balin.
Yes.
Representative Briglin.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears is virtual. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
Chair 901 approved.
So we've done that. There was also a request to have a bit of discussion on the veggie program during this segment. This is not an action item nor necessarily the jurisdiction of this committee, and I'm seeing that given the time, I'm sure that we can forestall that conversation for the legislative session. There probably will be a robust conversation about that. So thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Mr. Jones, Sullivan, thank you. And we have a line for others and grants, and we have nothing there. So we are on to the first report from our new Chief Fiscal Officer.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I think you have all received the fiscal officer's report. I can go through it if you want. It touches on revenues and budgeting, federal relief status. I'm happy to go through as much, but I might just touch on a few things about specifically about the office. We're working on issue briefs related to some of the big topics that were discussed about future ARPA spending. So those will be coming out this fall, and the goal is to provide
some background information and get the conversation started on there's climate change, clean water, housing, and those items. So that will be coming. Another item which we've hired, Dan Smith is retiring, if you remember, as our consultant, and we've hired Lisa Govin of Agilis, and she just started working with Dan, so she's on board. Working on IT review and operations, and we have 2 fiscal analysts who will come on board in mid-October, so they will be here at your November meeting.
Are they public, that the names?
I'm sure I will tell you that their names are Cole Agweck and Patrick Titterton. And they are, we're trying to do more of a team approach, so we have more backup within the office, but I would tell you Cole will be, one of the things he'll work on is education finance. And he also had an interview with Deb Brighton and Mark specifically on education finance, and Patrick Titterton will work on revenues as well. And he also had an interview with Deb and Mark interviewed the applicants just to see who might be available. I would say on education finance, we would like Deb to train 2 people on education finance work because we are, as a state, short-staffed on education finance modeling, and so the goal might be to train 2 people at the same time. She keeps trying to retire. She keeps rallying when we have a sort of a setback on staffing, but this goal, she was thrilled with the idea of training 2 people at the same time. So hopefully that will help build up our state resources collectively for everybody. I don't know if anybody else has any questions about this, but this ties into my request. I have a request to you all for a limited service position. And this is related to all of the ARPA funding that we'll be getting and the work that you all will be undertaking. We're asking for a limited service position through 2024, fiscal year 2024. And it is essentially to assist us in dealing with the budget decisions that you all are going to have to make on those federal funds that are coming through. Cost for this year would be $65,000. We would build that into the budget adjustment and use carry forward as well with that discussion, and then build it into the 2023 budget. I don't know if you have any questions about that.
I can say that I encouraged Ms. Benham to submit this request to us. I was reflecting on the numbers of limited service positions that we allowed to be created in the executive branch to respond to the ARPA funding, and thinking that we certainly have an increase in demands and need to attend how we manage our information and staffing. So I'm pleased that you brought it forward to us. Senator Weston.
Just in the titling of this, I'm somewhat interested where, as the federal government moves on the infrastructure bill, and there is going to be a lot of work around, as you sit on natural resources and you watch the monies coming through for sewage treatment plants and all of those. I want to make sure that we have the staff to be able to work with those requests, and that will be coming in the communities that will have to work around the infrastructure pieces too. Have we thought about that as we talk about?
That's a great point, and it's interesting. We're still waiting for Treasury to put out guidance on that money, so that we're all in. I'm just talking to NCSL about that. We're all waiting for more information on that. I think at the moment, I'm feeling comfortable, but I think it also depends on what the guidance is and how precise, how following sort of our standard, gives us an opportunity to follow our standard processes. I think it's fine. If it's very vastly different, I think the administration will also come forward and want more assistance as well. And that, I think in that point in time, we may revisit it. It's a great point to keep on top of.
Okay. Did you have a question?
I did not. I just.
Okay.
But I will make the motion, and I will move to establish a limited service position in the Joint Fiscal Office to support the General Assembly in its appropriation of unallocated ARPA funds to address the effects of and needs related to the COVID-19 pandemic in Vermont. And I got to write all that out again.
Yeah, okay, so there's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Can you call the roll before you finish writing it?
I can.
Yeah.
Representative Ansel.
Yes.
Senator Balin.
Yes.
Representative Brigham.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears is virtual. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Hooper.
Yes.
We are 9-0-1 approved.
Okay, thank you.
all. Thank you very much for that.
So you were in the middle of your report, or were we at the end of?
I'm happy to just, I'm mindful of the time. I'm happy to answer any questions or get more information.
Thank you. Thank you for being mindful of the time and getting us there. So is there any other further business that folks would like to bring to us? I don't see any. Let me just remind you that our next meeting is in November 17th. In person, hopefully. So with that, I don't, we should have a motion to adjourn. Senator Kitchell, is there a second? And Senator Cummings, so thank you all. Actually not bad, but only a half an hour over considering.
And you're ready to go off live?